The Environment Select Committee. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Councillor Tom Bennett. I'm the chair of this committee, and we will start, as we always do, with 72 seconds to remember those who lost their lives in the fire of Grenfell Tower. Thank you very much. There are no apologies for absence. We have a full committee this evening. Very good. Minutes of the meeting held on 22nd of June have been circulated to the committee. Sorry, 23rd of June have been circulated to the committee ahead of this meeting. Is everyone, or all members of the committee, happy that I assign those as a true record? Very much. Okay. There's been a slight change in order to the published agenda. So item A6, priorities report from the lead member for Culture, Leisure and Community, will now move, basically switch places with A5, which is a review of electric vehicle charging. Declaration of interests. Do any members have a declaration they would like to make regarding the content of tonight's meeting? No declarations of interest.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
I should just say I have an electric vehicle.
Well, this is a good point, Councillor Kamali. I also have an electric vehicle, so we can both. It's a great opportunity to virtue signal, isn't it? Yeah. So we can make a record of that. I suppose that is indeed an interest. So we then move to the first substantive item on the agenda, which is the Opera Holland Park update. We're lucky to be joined this evening by James Clutton, the Chief Executive of Opera Holland Park, and Charles McKay, the Chairman of Opera Holland Park. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We've got the report, a very good report you sent us and was circulated at the meeting. We've read that, but before we proceed to questions, I'd like to hand over to you to, if you'd like to give us any further information or a presentation.
Thank you very much. James Clutton, I'm Chief Executive and Director of Opera at Opera Holland Park. Although since before we had private charity, I was also a RBKC Council Officer for 15 years, from 2000 to 2015. I'd just like to say thank you for inviting us, thank you for reading the papers in advance. Just pull out three things really. One is the bane of my life. I have to deal with it every day, that there's a preconception about opera that is very much one thing, and that's the opening gambit to every conversation I ever have about what I do for a living. I like to say that Opera Holland Park doesn't conform to that in nearly every way. We try our best to be as inclusive as possible. Our ticket price structure is completely different to any other company in this country, particularly the summer festivals. And where we try to be different is a relaxed atmosphere. There's not dress code, there's not long hour and a half interval for dinner. It's about the work and it's about accessibility to the work. When Opera Holland Park was founded in 1996, and to this day the central core has still been accessibility to quality work and cultural work. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we are, as I hope you can notice from the report, embedded in our community. We're very proud of our heritage here and proud of our future here. We work with a lot of local charities. We work with a lot of local schools that come to our school matinees. We work with a lot of local companies, including restaurants, and we have a special thing that we try to work with as many small companies, drink suppliers and food suppliers as possible, rather than just going to a big chain of that. We also have always had our award-winning project Inspire, which is our outreach work, which is in the agreement between the company and the council, but it wasn't a given when we started the company. We brought that in because we wanted to work with the community more. So I'm very proud of the work we've done and continue to do that. The third thing is that we want to be a cultural hub. Obviously, we've changed our theatre since the pandemic. We opened it out into a way that was described very nicely in a lot of the national newspapers about how we'd reacted to it with space, but also with more openness, reflecting the environment we work in the park, with the colour. There's a lot of wood involved. We've used a lot of recycled wood, recycled chairs, open the theatre out so more people can hear it from outside, as well as doing concerts from the stairs free every other week to passers-by within the park. We've worked closely with the Notting Hill Carnival. They've been a resident for a week each in the last 2 years since the pandemic, and many other smaller companies. The last thing I'd like to say is that also it's easy to think we run an opera company and that is about the singers and the orchestra, and of course it is. But in the summer season we employ, this year exactly, it was 378 people. That included carpenters, electricians, bar people, stewards, a lot of jobs across the thing that we're very proud to give that much work throughout the summer season.
Thank you very much. Before we move to questions, I just want to remind committee members of questions to consider in the paper. So it's questions to Mr. Clutton, any comments on the report. There's a specific question: does this review provide an opportunity to also rationalise the property arrangements currently in place with the organisation? And then comment further on the outputs of Opera on Park. So fairly broad. Colleagues, who has any questions for our guests? Yes, Councillor Eden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Clutton. That's very helpful. As I was discussing with Mr. McIntyre before, we're obviously slightly unusual in this committee in that none of us were on the council when the decision was taken. So apologies if these questions are more about a bit of context. I note that the ambition in 2015 when you became independent was for you to eventually become financially independent. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit more about the finances of OHP as they stand, how that's looking longer term.
I think we've got a big report coming up next year in September, so that's when it was agreed that we'd come back and do that in detail. But yes, it's been, when we signed that deal, we also didn't expect to deal with the global pandemic, so that's put us slightly out of our thing, but we're roughly on course for where we want to be. We've had to change our model. We've had to look at how we do things in different ways. So yes, it's on course. This year was a bit tough. I think this year was a very tough year. Struggling in not only people not wanting to come out, although we hit 95.8% of our target this year, which we were very pleased with. Disappointed because we didn't hit our target, but pleased that it was that high. So we're still struggling with that and making it easier for people to come. But it was a difficult year, but I think it's just put us a slight blip on that. But I think we were on a course and we remain on course to be where we need to be for next year.
And you put that down to COVID recovery, that was still sort of coming out of pandemic as it were, or
I think we had to just look at everything we did through different trusts and foundations. Supporters, we needed to talk to our supporters very clearly about what was coming out of the COVID time. I mean, I think the thing with the COVID time is that we obviously hit every business, but with us, with a lot of planning that had gone wrong there. So we had 2 shows that we cancelled in 2020 coming back this year. So yeah, I think it's very, very difficult to gauge on the whole. I think we were very pleased with where we were going. This year has been a bit more difficult, but I think we're happy that we can get back on track.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, so on track for next year, financially speaking, does that mean breaking even?
Yeah, that's the budget. The budget for the 23 season will be to break even.
Yeah.
And then when will the profit be based on your estimates?
Well, I think
Is
the
there a
profit.
timeline or projection?
I think the profit is very difficult. It's the breaking even that we need to get to, and because of course, even though we were very generously helped by the council, most of the companies are either subsidised by annually by the government, or they're incredibly high ticket prices. So what we're trying to do is get somewhere in the middle of that. We're not subsidised on an ongoing basis, but we're also trying to keep the prices very, very reasonable, and that's what we want to do as well. We give away a lot of free tickets as well every year for over 65s and under 18s, and a lot of reduced tickets. Now there's an argument for that we then start to make all of those tickets more expensive, which would help our finances, because A, not what we agreed, and also none of us in the company want to do that. So it's a strange hybrid of between two stalls, which we always knew. But I think we are pleased that we're on track-ish, and as I say, I think next year it needs to be a zero budget. And the aim then, really, the ultimate aim is obviously it'd be nice to go to profit, but it's that it's a zero budget from them. It's a neutral budget every year.
I had, sorry, Councillor Ross, come back to you in 1 second. You mentioned the free and reduced price, I think £5 tickets for young people and elderly people. Looking at young people, could you give us a bit more detail? So I've read the fantastic work you're doing with Out of the Park and schools matinees. Can you give us a little idea of, firstly, sort of numbers, how many children are engaged in this, and secondly, the outreach, so that it's not just children whose parents are into opera, who, which of course we want them to come, but also children whose parents might not be into opera, sort of going into, for example, if you approach all the different schools in the borough,
Yeah.
that sort of outreach.
We asked every school in the borough to
Yeah.
come. Obviously, we had 6 schools in the borough come as schools this year to our schools matinee. It was interesting though that we had a higher figure of children attended. It didn't make sense on the first graph people gave me in the team, but it was because we had more kids coming in because of teachers that were based in Kensington, Chelsea.
Mhm.
So their lead address was at Kensington.
Right,
postcode.
yeah.
So including those, there were 9 schools that came where the teacher came from, the lead teacher came from the borough. So that was yeah, that was 400 kids this year from Kensington Chelsea schools. But we do a lot of other work with them outside of the season. And so, but that's in different groups as well. We do a lot of things with individual groups where we're mixing up younger people and older people in interactive things. But in answer to your last question, Councillor, the thing about children of people into opera, that's the last thing of our list. It's the people it's the kids that just want to come. And we've got a couple of videos which I can make available of children that have come after the school's matinees who had never been to any opera before, particularly not even any theatre before, and they're really engaged by it. So absolutely not. It's not about the children from parents who are our friends. It's about getting into other children to give them a doorway into the arts generally. As I say, when I speak to the school groups, it's not only about singing or the orchestral players. It's about that there might be children there that end up wanting to be senior painters or carpenters or electricians or whatever. I think we try and show the whole thing, that there are a lot of different careers there. I mean, obviously, some people don't like careers in the arts, but I obviously am a big supporter of careers. When I do careers nights for people, the parents are dragging their children away from my table to make sure they're into the arts. But I think that, so we try to give as many opportunities as possible, and that includes being on stage after the show, going to touch the costumes, being interested, talking to the singers after the show, they come out in costume.
Yeah.
To make sure that it's not us and them, that they're much more engaged in it. So we would do more and more of that if we could get more children in. It's just about getting the context of the school year is very busy, and getting them out of their school time and stuff. But we do it more and more, because there's a couple of films we've got which I will make available the singers that do the school matinees always say to me, it's the nearest they're ever going to be to being a pop star. Because the children scream and cheer rather than politely applaud like our adult audiences.
Thank you.
But it's very much aimed at people who would not otherwise come to opera.
Yeah.
Typical school, and they're all state schools, the typical school would say, nobody who came, none of these children have ever been to an opera before. And their parents certainly wouldn't have been either. So it's introducing, and what blows the mind, I think, of the teachers is the kids just take it. Comes to water, and they stand there and scream opera.
Yeah. I should actually say, Councillor, it's an interesting thing that we don't try and dumb it down at all. We do two versions. The very junior school one is reduced time and introducing the instrument. But the full school's matinee is just in whatever language it is that year. It's the full uncut thing.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of work in schools before, and people say they like the kids listening to languages, listening to the story, and so we try and do the whole picture.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Rusty and then Councillor
Just want to ask you, what additional help do you need from the council in order to make you financially profitable and probably quite quickly than you estimate?
What are you offering, Councillor?
No, I understand, not from the facilities that we provide.
I just
want to check
it.
We're just here to ask questions.
The grant, and Sue and I were very much involved in that.
Not the money.
Yeah, but that was the point. The grant, the £5 million, was based on the council's forecast of how long it would take us to break even, which was 2023, which looks as if that may well be it, but it's been up and down in between. And then to leave a reserve, because the problem about a company like this, which does not get and will not get central government money, and the borough made it very clear this was it. It was 5 million, and please don't come back and ask for any more, because it's the answer to the question. But there are many other things which are very helpful to get to your question. One of them is that we have contracts for certain properties and things which we use. You're coming on to the question of rationalisation and so forth. But that's very important, and once on a knife edge, to get this thing and keep it at break-even, we're slightly above. And if we suddenly have to start paying for things which we agreed we wouldn't pay for, that would hurt us quite badly. So it's if you suddenly have a feeling that you'd like to help us in other ways, we'd be more.
Could I also answer that, Councillor, because I think I understand your question more now, is also, and Sue and I had a chat about this just last week, in that what helps us deliver, not only the financially, but the company generally, is access to the people we want to get to. And so we did a session this year with refugee women based in this borough. But that was hard to access the right groups, and if we could do that through the council to get straight to where we want to be helping, that would really. It's the same that we do work with Age UK, KNC, but if there was access to expand that with different groups of elderly people, that would be great. Because the thing is, we've got a very small team. We have to contact those people individually, wait for replies. If there was a way of accessing the people that we could get intravenously into helping people, we'd love that. That would really help. Because then our supporters, and it does come back to finances, because our supporters mainly like us, because hopefully we give them international quality opera, but they like us because we deliver things to the community. And so the more that we can do for the community, the more money we think our supporters will give us.
Which goes back to the cultural hub.
Well, certainly, I think the council, I'm sure Ms. Harris will agree and continue to assist with that, but it is a very good route, be it into refugees or I learn with interest about the benefit of opera for people with dementia, and again, council is a good route into those groups.
That
of
would be
people as
great,
well.
Councillor.
Yeah.
It's the time taken to get into the right groups to make sure it's hitting the right people that causes us the problem. If the council can help with that, that would be wonderful.
I think the committee, I'm sure, would agree that the council working closely with you on that is a very good idea. I want to go to Councillor Wheaton-Sands because he had his hand up, and I'll go to Councillor Chiduk, then Councillor No.
Two really quick ones. Firstly, I'd be interested in knowing, given your experience of the last 7 years, what is it that sort of being independent achieved rather than obviously previous history of being part of the promotion? What has, if you could maybe give us again a bit more context of sort of what has it allowed you to do that perhaps you wouldn't have been able to? Has it been a success in your point of view?
Yes, I think it has. I think that we were very close to the council and still are, hopefully. I mean, we've just been working with the culture team this week and we just agreed on our performance with that. But I think that there is, and there was then, because as you rightly said, there was not that many people here. No one on this committee that was there then, I think.
Yeah.
So that is a difficult thing. The problem that was becoming a problem for both parties was that some people didn't want to give us money, financial support, because they thought it was just making the amount the council would give us less. So there was a real hesitancy about people giving us financial support in some areas. They included trusts and foundations that we can apply to now because we're external. But in individual things, on a really basic thing, and it's of course it was always brilliant and the council were always so supportive of us. But if someone used to give us a donation, they used to make it out to the Royal Borough of Kensington Church because we were a department. And that wasn't the way that we could expand that, then people giving us more money. So that's why it was genuinely amicable in every way, and it made a lot more sense. So that's the biggest single thing. And because then we can just be trying to work with different companies. I talked earlier on about the independent companies. We can just make that as a decision to say we're not going to get the cheapest drinks in just because they're important and we want to give local businesses the chance. And it just has more of a feel. But the biggest single thing was finances and how people looked at it.
There's one other thing, James, isn't there, is that a local authority has to work on a financial year. I'm not going to collect money for the following years. In the opera world, if you're going to get the right singers, you can't say at the beginning of the year, right, who would like to come and sing. So it enabled James Ewing, he would come to the trustees and say, look, this is what I'd like to do in the next 3 years, and you just start lining people up. And we could do that as a board of trustees, which Borough Assembly couldn't do. So I think that's been quite helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Just very quickly as well. I think reading a lot of interest in investing in the future. I think just as important as the outreach you do to things is career opportunity, which you touched on briefly.
Yeah.
Could you give us a bit more information? I know obviously the borough we're very keen on apprenticeships and we've done a lot last year's apprenticeships. I think that is something actually is really exciting about what you do and really good to hear more.
Sure. Well, certainly on the probably not you mean directly, but the SIG is the easiest one to talk about because we invest in youth deeply with profound effect. So this year, for example, we had 17 alumni of our own Young Artist Scheme as principal roles or directors or conductors. So that's enabled us to have a more family feel to the company, and it's also been able to see career development so people get involved in. I've seen that director. The director of Carmen this year started off in 2016 with us as an observer, where she just came into the room just to watch how it was done. And this year she was director of, so she went from observer to assistant to associate to the artist to director. So that's one area of work that we do with singing professionals or directing and conducting professionals. The other things, we do use apprentices. We do use them mainly on the technical side of the industry. The problem is, and I don't know in individual businesses you've had this, but the problem on our technical side of the business this year was our biggest problem about staff. We've never had problems like that before. And that's the same as if you're talking to the Royal Opera House or Glyndebourne or West End theatres. Getting technical staff or backstage staff became more and more difficult. So we would naturally go to younger people to say, come and have a go at this, because those people just being taken at the time. There's lots of reasons for it. People wanting lifestyle change post-pandemic. A lot more people moving into TV and film, because there's a lot more companies based here now for tax reasons, and there's less hours. So there's lots of different reasons for that. So we had to go in young. So people that were looking at being second assistant in wardrobe or wigs and makeup and then running the department. So I think there's a natural thing, because we have quite a friendly atmosphere. We hope that I think that we can make that happen. But I think it is. Youth has been our thing, and investing in youth, because it's paid off for us time and time again. Whether being, my main assistant, such as a producer in her own right now, she came to me because she was on work experience 10 years ago, and was out from work experience from university. She came for a 3-week placement. She came back at the end of the summer, and she's been here for 10 years. So there's a graduation through. My number 2 before that is now the producer of the Royal Opera House. She came work experience for 1 week, only stayed for 8 years, and then moved to the Royal Opera. So we like progression, but it's once again it's finding and having access to the right people that we can get to.
Can I ask if you liaise with any of the youth clubs in the borough?
I don't. Well, we only not really youth club. We work a lot with Rugby Portobello.
Okay.
We've done a lot with them over many years. For the cultural history for people that wasn't around, we actually worked with them for about 15 years. We also lost one of our members of staff in the Grenfell fire. That's our own team member. So we always had a connection with that particular charity, and we've worked with them a lot since.
Okay.
So we work with them, but that's the only one.
Can I recommend then that you, through the council, you can get all the details, but as you go into next season, reach out to the youth clubs in the borough. There's not too many of them. And I'll abuse my position as chairman, in particular Earls Court Youth Club in my ward, which I know would love to engage on. I mean, the chap who runs it would absolutely love to engage with this, be it sort of more passively watching the shows, or more actively providing apprentices or work experience opportunities. So that would be great. Councillor Chadu.
Yes, I have a simple question. It says here before 2015 you were sort of part by the council, of the council. So did you stay in Holland Park and Promises as a leaseholder or as a charity free of charge, or did you pay any charges for that time before 2015?
No, before 2015 we were a department. It wasn't an independent company. We were a department of the council.
I gather that, but how did you use the premises within Holland Park? Did you pay like a charge?
Council-owned.
We were council-owned. We were
Council-owned premises and council-owned.
So you didn't pay any rent or anything like that. You've been literally part of it. Is what I try to gather. So since you got this grant, become independent, are you a leaseholder? Because you are a charity, you registered as a charity. So I just want to gather from a financial perspective if you are allowed to stay there free of charge, or you are a leaseholder and council is getting money from this £5 million you've been offered to become independent. You know what I'm driving at?
No, absolutely. No, it was a lease for 25 years, John? 25 years on the site.
And it says here that this will be ideal opportunity once you become independent to formalize the property arrangement. How would you like this to be formalized? In what way you would like to see it?
Can I add to that question? The additional properties mentioned in the report, and that specific question that we're considering and rationalising. What do you think the property requirements are? And as Councillor Chadu said, how would you like to formalise that arrangement?
Well, it was formalised at the time of signing the original deal. You know, what we had at the time we continue to use for that time. As things move on, that's everything, but that's what it was at that time.
To that, Sue, if you want to, because
Yeah.
you and I spent quite a lot of time on this.
Well, all I would add, I worked with James and Charles at the time. All I would add is that the various premises that OHP either occupy part of the season, part of the year, or have storage space for, there were different arrangements for each little area.
Yeah.
And that is something I think we've all agreed it makes sense to rationalise.
Yeah.
And it will be in the context now. So when these arrangements were set up in 2015, we didn't have a housing and social investment executive director or department. So now that we have a social investment approach, and we've got until September 2023 to really look at that, I think as a council we would want to have discussions in that context, bringing our property colleagues involved in the discussions as well, but around social investment and the social value that OHP is adding.
I think the social value is from the reports and our conversations very clear. What I would say is, and I would have to say all of us are completely unqualified on this committee to tell you how much space you need. but the whole council is up against some significant budget pressures. So we're going to have to look at our requirements and really be tough on ourselves, and so encourage you to do the same when going through that.
And Sue and I have been, and Charles have been, talking about some ideas, not ready to present to at the moment, but I think we have been looking.
Yeah, okay.
I'd just like to make two comments. The first is that when the borough made its forecasts of how long they reckoned as an independent company would take to break even, which looks as if really it's going to be that, they then said these things like the site you're not going to pay for, because if they're going to pay for them, then they're going to have to find even more money to put up front to cover them. Break even. So that was part of the deal. It was 5 million to cover the losses other than the property which would continue, and it was agreed it would continue free of charge, etc.
Yes.
So, until the review.
Until the review, yeah. And then at the review, which is this time next year, effectively, end of September next year, what was discussed was that if the borough was still feeling austerity, which one way or another, I guess you still are, you could say, and if we were, out of the woods and beginning to sort of look more profitable, as it were, we would then could sit down and discuss, whether we should pay something or not, and it's quite a detailed negotiation, and we said if we can't agree, then it will be an independent advisor.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to Sue, it'll be a lovely problem to have. I hope you're able to charge us rent at that stage, because that means we'll be out of the woods and making money, but I've got a horrible feeling that may never happen.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the situation.
Yeah.
So the fact that we're not paying is because that was included in making the figure of £5 million.
Yes, no, I understand, and this forum isn't the place to go into too much detail on that discussion. But just to the point around rationalisation of property, and we're all going to have to be tough on ourselves. So that's in the point of making.
So
yes, one more question.
it's the last one, because to clarify. So at the moment you are not leaseholder, because when you are leaseholder and you are in trouble financially, you can rent it, you can sublet to someone, property. And obviously during summertime you are active because it's open. Winter time, so this is what I try to gather. If you are able to stay now, I want to understand what management yourself you have within that grants. Are you able to rent it at winter time, which brings you extra money? It stands empty, just pointless. You're not driving.
Yeah, it's not ours then. We get the list for the summer.
We only have access from middle of March to end of
Middle of March
September.
to end of
To
September.
build the theatre, take it down, and
And then the council have management within those, and they can rent it to whoever they want to bring the extra.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you easy, because obviously it is a small space within the year to come out.
And in terms of the space, just one, if you saw our offices in 37 Pembroke Road, and we've already given back half of it, we only have a very, very small staff. I mean, they're sitting one on top of the other. I think James would have 2 people sitting on top of them, basically.
So does that include the property arrangement?
Sorry, Councillor Rexy, we don't have much time. We're going to get Councillor Noah in, and then if you have one very quick one, I'll go back to you at the end. Councillor Noah.
I think some of my questions have been already asked about the property, but I just want to touch on your element of outreach. We have within the Royal Borough constituency residents lobby over disabilities, in particular children and young people. There's a charities who work in the borough, especially in the North Kensington. I mean, how do you reach out, in particular, Full of Life, who work with a lot of children and young people with disabilities, and provide short breaks and the support for those youngsters.
Yeah. Well, I think I touched on that in the report really. I mean, we reach out to a lot of charities. Now, obviously, some don't want to come to us. Some there's very many myriad reasons why that's the case. But obviously, with our team, we do as much as we can. The difference that I would say, Councillor, is that most opera companies, all theatre companies that are subsidised, they end up doing a lot of outreach work because they need to justify the subsidy they're going to get. Ours is the reverse. We all are committed to it. We all got into this business to do things like that. So we would do more and more work if we can. We end up having people say, no, we don't want anyone, you know, that's fine. You know, we would go to, so any introduction to any specific charity we would gladly take. And because we can only get round to so many of them, is what I said to the chair earlier on. I think that we would, any direct introductions to places, because the council of people that have those injunctions, we would do it because we've worked with a lot of people. We had to go outside to a separate organisation to be able to call Karma Bank, to be able to find the Afghan women refugees that were based in the borough. So all of those things, so the more information that we get and the direct introductions, we would do it because we absolutely believe in the power of art, the power of music. I've done this job for a long time, and I just believe in it. So the more people that we can get involved in that, the better. So I would never turn down an introduction to someone that we could try to help.
Again, just one more point.
Yes, a quick one.
A quick one. And I am assuming the council meets the cost of repairs of the building.
The what, sorry?
The council meets the cost of repairs of the building.
To the house, yes. But we are very careful. I mean that quite seriously. The first day of every different company of performers that come in on every show, part of the introduction chats is part from how they get into the thing. We talk through the history of the house and about being grade one and that we have to look after it. We do that every single opening day. Thank you.
And there's also a visual inspection before the season starts.
Yeah.
And at the end of the season from parks and other property stuff.
Especially with the Pirates of Penzance, I can imagine. Get a bit lively. We must move on, but do you have a very quick question?
Jake, so when would your turn for the arrangement be ready so that we can have a look before the actual
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
I mean, when would you draft your arrangement before the renewal so that we can have a look?
So you do ahead of the
September next year.
official
Yeah,
review.
before the September.
I haven't even thought about when that would be. I mean, we finish our season in August, so we'd be around that point. But we'd be working on it through that year because we know whereabouts we're going to be, and then finalise it at the end of August. I would imagine because we don't finish until the middle of August, so then we have to take that information in. So I think around.
I think, Chairman, I just want to bring that to the committee.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So I suppose the point is that the committee, as much point for officers as for you. The committee would like the opportunity to review that and give our input into that before any executive decision is made. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a very interesting topic to discuss and fantastic to hear about your
I
work.
tried to keep the reports short so they're easy.
Yeah, well, it means we read them. Yeah.
I didn't want to say that.
It was very nice to me. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
So we'll now move on to item A6. Priorities for the lead member for culture, leisure and community safety. Who was welcome. We don't want to say to the stand, that sounds bad. To the table. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all. It's actually very exciting to be able to come and talk to you about some of the things we're doing. What I really wanted to say is these aren't all my priorities. If I put all the things we're doing down, the report would have been, all night. But I just tried to gather them into sort of main headlines to give you a flavour. So under parks, what we're doing in the back, which is just about to be published, which is a really big piece of work and covers so much of what's important to us. But there is ongoing work in park improvement all the time, and we have a regular capital programme for that, and that's going on, and we've alluded to that in here. And we've just, again, alluded to the leisure work that's going on as well. It is a priority, but I just can't tell you, I can't talk about everything of it. And then under culture, I've just really given you the culture plan because it's the main document, but under that sits a great deal of other things. And fortunately for me, I've got lots of wonderful officers here who can answer probably less into more detail. So I've got Terry, who heads up the team, Lorena, Alice and Morris from the parks team if you haven't met them.
Would you like any of them to join you?
Well, they can all join me if they want, or not. I don't mind. Terry, do you want to go? Do you want to? Yeah. So not splendid isolation. So, and what we've given you here is, you know, some, as I say, the sort of main.
You've got name badges as well.
Pass those down. But really, rather than us talk at you, we thought it would be more helpful to give you some information and really answer questions. Oh, God, it's not here. Brenna's there, sorry. Alice, I don't think. Alice,
Don't worry about it.
so Alice is the main author of the biodiversity action policy and doing a huge amount of work, so I think on that. So really, over to you all to.
Colleagues, who would like to ask first question? Councillor Dorian.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor. Can I ask about the RBKC Green Fund? This has come up a number of times in various reports. Would you be able to explain exactly what it is, what's in the pot, and how we access it?
Well, the good news is we have Councillor Kamali here, who's actually the Green Fund sits under him, not me, unless Terry wants to answer the question. Because he covers both.
I'm looking at the right reports, aren't they?
No, we do allude to it, but it's not in my gift, sadly. I can apply for money for it, but I'm not.
So the Green Fund is £1 million a year for the next 10 years. We've got the Green Plan, the Council Green Plan, so 5 environmental priorities in there. So we've got tackling climate change or addressing climate change, improving air quality, minimising waste, tackling fuel poverty and biodiversity. So it's mostly internal at the moment, so we can bid for any kind of projects that help deliver those environmental priorities. We are looking at opening up to having a look at slicing that for community to access as well.
So at the moment, is various departments within the council can bid for funding if they're delivering a project outlined.
Exactly. So, for instance, at Kensington Memorial Park, we successfully bid for some money to deliver some of the improvements there.
It's £1 million a year.
It's £1 million a year, yeah. And there's a little bit of public health funding that's been added to that as well to work with schools around improving air quality.
Yeah.
So also we can work with schools to bid for that extra money. I think it's around 200,000.
Okay, that's good to know. I think it's probably useful for councillors.
Yeah.
We can send it up.
Any who aren't already aware of it, to know about it. Councillor Rossi.
Is that open bid? The £1 million fund? Or is it?
It's mostly through like services at the moment. So if there's a kind of an internal project within the council, whether it is working with schools to improve their kind of work around net zero, whether it's work with schools around air quality, then they can bid for that as well.
They as in the resident.
And it's services at the moment, but we can work with residents on that so they can get the benefit of that grant as well.
Yes, Councillor Williamson.
Just a couple. Firstly, is I love maps.
I said we must put the maps. The maps are really good. Maps tell a story.
Absolutely. I just want to draw committee and your attention to the sort of first two maps we've got. There's no page. Sort of the page after the local nature recovery strategy.
The sinks one.
Yeah, just the AOD to sinks. I'd be interested in knowing how you define an area of efficiency. First off, and then secondly, we obviously have got a big sway in that sort of bit just north of Nottingham Gate. And I know we're investing a lot of money in parks, getting a brand new park, all very exciting stuff. It'd just be good to hear as well, I guess depending on your definition of what efficiency is, how we might go about combating and what plans there are in place to look at combating those.
That is an excellent question. Something I'm going to let Alice just give you the definition, and then we can sort of try and manage the rest of it between us.
Sure. So the area of deficiency, so the sinks are sites of importance for nature conservation. Areas of deficiency can be mapped at various scales. The map here shows areas of deficiency to sinks, so it's where people have to walk more than 1 kilometre to meet sink. So sinks have different grade ratings depending on their importance in terms of nature and biodiversity. So at the very top is metropolitan grade, and then borough grade 1, borough grade 2, local grade. So this map shows areas where people have to walk more than 1 kilometre to meet to get to a metropolitan or a borough level grade sink site. So that is publicly accessible is also a key one. So for example, kind of like bang in the middle of this big purple splodge here, for example, is the Ladbroke Grove private garden squares, which form a really important sink site, but obviously not publicly accessible.
So the second, I think the other part of your question is harder to answer about what we can do. Obviously we cannot. One of the things we talk about in this report is biodiversity net gain and the urban green factor and the planning changes. And unfortunately, we've got our planning expert over here as well. And I'm certainly, where we get the opportunities to create new green spaces through planning, that's something I'm going to be really pushing on. I think the minimum is a 10% biodiversity, although in fact we haven't formally decided that is part of the USPD. That's probably pardon the USPD, but I think one of the questions we're going to have when we have developments with developers, what are our priorities? I'm always going to say I want more green space. Other colleagues may feel that housing or other things are more important. So that's one way. There may be smaller opportunities around what we call hotspots.
There's also opportunities. So we're just completing a borough-wide habitat survey at the moment of all open spaces over 0.25 hectares. And part of the report, which will be completed at the end of the year, is to give recommendations on all of the parks and sink sites about what we can be doing to improve biodiversity. And some of those actions that we might be able to take might lift up the grade of some of the parks that are in some of these areas, so that they might then register as a borough grade. Some of them are only local grade at the moment, so they might meet the standard to be lifted up a level in terms of sink grade.
Yes.
What we need to do to get them upgraded in terms of...
It will vary completely depending on the site, so it will come out in the report. It could be, you know, if there's opportunities to improve the biodiversity planting or change the mowing regimes or plant, you know, more native trees or hedging or something like that. It's all about, looking at the site as a whole and how it connects, provides sort of opportunities for nature to flourish.
I think it's worth noting as well that just because it's indicated as purple on there, we're doing a lot of work to improve biodiversity across the borough. So there's a lot of kitchen gardens going in, there's the beach behind. So just because it's shaded purple, it doesn't mean people don't have access to nature.
Yeah, this main purple area in the north is actually where we have our highest concentration of community kitchen gardens. Sort of shoehorned into every nook and cranny of estates around here. So there are,
And that doesn't affect.
Well, no, because they're for this grading, they're not sink sites.
They're not of sufficient quality.
There's stuff happening, but maybe not.
It's not quite as a sink.
This is in some ways this is quite a technical exercise because it's all to do with how they define them. But I think from my perspective, whether it's a window box or a lovely big park, having some access to green space, nature, the opportunity to work with plants is really important to people. You know, we cannot create enormous swathes of parks. You know, much as I'd love to, although we are going to have a new park on Oxford Road tonight today. But I will, those hotspots, the kitchen gardens, they don't really show up on this, but they are part of the overall picture we're thinking about. And as I say, on planning, I will definitely be keen to. Sorry, I've been talking too much, sorry.
Very, very quickly then, just because you mentioned as well, but on plan, how are we actively engaging to essentially increase greening? Because it's hard enough for this to drag planning officers away from sessional units, let alone do more greening. I mean, just as an example, there was an application that came to the committee a few weeks ago that was essentially identical to an application that had gone in about 5 or 6 years ago. And it didn't seem, despite us having a biodiversity SPD, greening SPDs and all these sorts of policies, it didn't seem that officers had made much of an effort to put those into effect or increase greening on the site.
Can sometimes be difficult with the identical applications, certainly in terms of the new applications.
Policies change. You'd expect if we're now putting greater emphasis on greening
Well, I think this is almost a rhetorical question. I mean, the fact that you are aware of it is really important. So obviously there's a conversation on bigger sites that we will probably have, but some of the smaller applications, there is going to be, it's going to be a negotiation, and having councillors who are aware of this and want to push for this, but that may mean we don't get other things, is really important. So I'm hoping you'll all be the cheerleaders for getting the minimum and more.
But the problem is, I think by the time it comes to committee, right, is that often it's too late to do anything about that stuff. We need to be getting in there before.
Well, the cabinet member for planning is also well aware of my desire to improve.
We're ready to. We can take this question.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really it is. But I will certainly be beating the drum. But I do recognise that there are other competing interests, and there may be times when rightly people will say housing or other things are more important. But I'm always going to push for more green space, and that's.
And the biodiversity net gain, which is being introduced, is
And the
to help
urban
address that.
and the urban greening factor as well.
The biodiversity net gain is going to be quite complex thing to introduce into the borough, which is why I work very closely with the planning team and kind of trying to look at providing comments in the pre-application phase to make sure that that some sort of we find a resolution that works for everyone before it gets to.
And that is that proposed to be part of the next local plan?
Yes.
Biodiversity?
Yes.
Okay. That's quite tangible
Exactly.
improvement. Councillor Burns.
Hi, thank you. So on the grot spots, what's the sort of average time turnaround to get it not a grot spot?
That's a really
And
good
do we track
question.
it?
Well, sometimes we want them to be a big grotty, don't we?
It's a project by project basis,
Yeah.
basically. So if it's obviously a larger site, it can take longer. But usually what we try and do is transform kind of an underused or derelict site and transform it into kind of like a kitchen garden. So it's like a food growing garden, which residents then use and actually maintain.
And how, like, on average, so far, I guess, with the ones you've maybe done already, I don't know, how long has that taken, or do you, I know they're different.
Yeah, it can be relatively quick, to be fair. It can be a few months down to like a year. It depends on the consultation.
Okay.
Can you give us an example,
Yeah.
an anecdote?
I give you an example of one in my ward that probably took a bit longer than we wanted, but it was during COVID.
So I mean, Russell Road was actually relatively quick, to be fair. So it's what we try and do is identify the site, then do some consultation around with the residents and the landowner just to find out what people want for that space, and then develop an idea, again consult on that idea, then obviously try and secure some funding if we don't have that, and then implementation. So it can honestly, if we've got really good consensus around the idea, it can take just a few months. If not, it does take longer.
What about the London Tall Gardens? Is that sorted?
No.
Okay, so that's a bad example. Let's think of a good example.
Also, for the maintenance of all these gardens, like how often, how regular, like what's the kind of...
Are you just talking about the kitchen gardens?
Well, actually all, but yeah, let's do each.
All green spaces.
Yes.
It's a really good question again. So kitchen gardens, that's one of the kind of best aspects of it. Is we get residents get allocated a plot, so they actually do the maintenance themselves. So they decide what to grow and how to maintain.
Do they all do that? Like, are they avidly interested in doing it, or do they kind of neglect it?
That's
after a while?
fluctuate. So we have ground rules which people sign each year, and that kind of sets out how you should maintain your plot.
Okay.
And that does get reviewed by the community gardeners.
A yearly review.
Yeah.
And
we
we
do
do have-
revoke plots as well.
And we have a team supporting.
So we have a community gardening team that sit within the ecology service, and we work very hard with all the plot holders and lots of encouraging emails. We go and do sort of community engagement days to help clear up gardens, and we will come in and do works like trimming or cutting back branches where beds may have fallen into disrepair. So we're currently doing quite a cycle of repairs because it's about 10 years since quite a lot of them have been installed, so the sleepers kind of rot. So we have a budget to do those repairs out of.
And then on the bigger parts, the maintenance contract, it's done by Ida Verdi, and that's a contract we re-tendered in April.
2019.
We just did it this year. Was it last year? Well, so Monica and her team oversee it, but all the day-to-day work is done by Ida Verdi, and we did, it probably was last year, when did that contract started? Yeah, we don't worry,
So was that-
neither of us can remember what year it was.
Um,
So that's done by who you may have seen.
Got one more
Is-
question, sorry.
Could I just jump in on that point, and then we'll go back to you. Is the contract outcomes based or time based? And how do we track it, and how actively do we engage with Ida Verde on their performance on that?
So we have a whole list of KPIs. I mean, Monica probably can give you the. Sorry, I'm going to put you on the hotspot.
You can come join us. Goodbye.
This is Monica Castellino, this
Our manager.
Yeah.
Park Manager.
So we have, I have a team of 2 officers, they're area based north and south. We're co-located with Ida Verde in Holland Park, in glass houses. So we have a very active monitoring regime. The contract is output based. There are some items that are frequency based, like locking, unlocking, litter, playground inspections, health and safety inspections. The rest is output based. My 2 officers monitor the contract. They visit sites on a weekly basis. We cover 28 parks and 2 cemeteries and then nearly 60 highway sites. So we do random sampling every week. We have fortnightly operations meetings, and we monitor KPIs through our partnership board. So it's very heavily monitored contract.
Okay, and how are they performing?
Very well. There were some dips when we had mobilisation, but that was quite a big changeover from the last contract. We changed quite a few of the standards. There was a bit of a settling in period. But on the whole, I think we're performing very well. We've got very good staff retention, which is much better than the previous contract. Now that we're paying under living wage, and things have really improved.
And is grass quality part of the contract?
There are different specifications for different types of grass, so based on whether it's sports grass, amenity grass, cemetery grass, wildflower meadow, pictorial meadow. So we go on a length basis, so it's not frequency cut, because we do reduce in the summer if it's a heat wave and the grass isn't growing. We do scale it back. We have mechanisms in place to leave grass longer in the summer to aid moisture retention. So it's, I couldn't give you a kind of fixed standard.
So one of our parts in Red Cliff, Red Cliff Square, does have an issue with grass quality, but perhaps we can that up afterwards. Can I ask, would it be useful for councillors or indeed residents to engage more frequently if they see issues with park maintenance and sort of report it into you, so you can then hold those to account on that?
Yes, absolutely. So we updated all of the park signage last year, and it now has our parks email address, which is monitored by myself and 2 parks officers. So people can give us that feedback anytime. We also have a phone number published on every entrance to every site. Ida Verde are also going to be carrying out a satisfaction survey every year as part of one of their commitments in the contract. We're about to launch that shortly. And so we will be getting satisfaction ratings for different areas of the contract and inviting residents to participate.
That's really helpful, and it'd be good once we have that satisfaction survey, share it with the committee, and also if you do have any published information on just the performance against the contract, that might be worth sharing with us as well.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, I wanted to know more about what you're doing now in different areas, so new projects that are coming up. Obviously, I know Lots Road is about to come into play. I know there's something going on, obviously, in my own along Cheney Walk as well. Yeah. What else? Where else is happening right now that's sort of under negotiation, and when are they going to be ready?
And what budget do we have out?
Yes.
So we didn't. We gave you a flavour, but we can just give you the list because there's a huge number going on across the borough. About 10.
We have at least, I think, 10 different projects on the go at the moment. So we've got new playgrounds currently going in Sunbeam Gardens, Kingsley Wanderers Presence, Avondale Park. We're starting consultation on a new playground for St Luke's Gardens. We've got the Chapter Embankment project. We recently completed improvements at Cremorne Gardens. We're putting in a changing places facility at Holland Park, which is where it's there, so that's going to massively improve our accessibility. We're also planning a new building at Kensington Memorial Park, which will have a changing places facility, again improving our accessibility for people with complex needs or who have carers and carer support. We're putting in a new playground at Kensington Memorial Park next year. We've just put in outdoor gyms at Kensington Memorial Park and Avondale Park. There's a lot of improvements. I'm happy to share the list.
Power Square.
Oh, Power Square.
How could we forget that? There's a lot. We'll happily. I mean, we didn't provide a whole list, but perhaps we could have done. And in terms of the funding, We're very fortunate that we have a fixed capital budget every year, which we use for park improvements.
Okay.
And that's, I think we're unusually unlucky, but that's how we are able to maintain, and you saw we did really well in the London and doing. That's how we're able to maintain our parks and standards which residents want. And we always welcome mystery shopping, by the way, about grass or other issues in the parks.
I'm very happy to
not even mystery shopping, but constructive feedback.
Just on the funding, I know in the Conservative Party Manifesto ahead of the last election, we said that we'd spend £6 million on new parks and improvements parts, capital expenditure effectively. Sounds like we're on course to deliver that.
Yeah, we have a budget which is just shy of £1 million every year to spend capital improvements. So.
Okay, so I think it was 6 million.
Well, that's just our, and that's what's pre-decided. But we additionally to some of the bigger projects we have extra funding for those. So the one in KMP, for instance.
Okay, so it's just shy of £1 million standard, and then additional.
That's the manual capital.
Yeah.
Which are larger projects.
Okay.
Do we have a list of those as well?
Councillor Judith.
Yes, I've been waiting. Thank you. What I wanted to find out from this green fund, because here it's on page 47, it says, in regards to biodiversity in the little scraps, I cannot see nothing about SATs. However, you are very happy to implement state of phase 3 in Holland Park. I know we have 6 million to spare for parks improvement. Sun being playground, it's about £100,000, and I cannot see any greening down there. What I wanted to ask you is, when you design this kind of playgrounds, do you consider biodiversity and what is happening with the global warming? Because I had to bring it up, but this is too much plastic, too much superficial, and it's not really much of greening in regards to SATs when we went to Queen's Caroline Estate. So it's another flooding committee. Every single corner was used magnificently. And I was today walking around with those scraps, and I did a really long walk here and there, and I really cannot see how you can deliver it in North Kensington, because it's such a waste in little scraps. There's the little corner, so literally bare, nothing is there growing. You are not thinking about SATs. What I want to know, if this green fund can, to some extent, allow SATs. I know there is a different pool of money for SATs to be introduced. Can I use it? Let's say that school wants a project and speak to Alice and speak to Monica, we already spoke about family, and they apply for the funding. So how? Because you say here, we more or less, we guide. I cannot see how you guide, because we had a longer conversation and I had to really start something, involve the school. So
we need to get to the question, sorry.
So the question is, can I apply for SATs under the Green Fund?
We can work with you on potential an application for the Green Fund for science, yes.
Because INSEPICS next year, and let's say a few residents want really something happening much sooner. Another question I have about the kitchen gardens. You have a residents who have interest and they come to you and you put them on a list and you allocate a plot.
Yeah. We have a waiting list though, it's probably a very large waiting list.
Yes, but the issue is now, and it was brought to my attention, that people actually have interest for 5 minutes and later they lose the interest. And when you go, let's say, St. Mark's Road, there's a big plot and it's absolutely in state of appalling, nobody's using that, and there is a name to it. You go to Charles Hospital, there's another name to it. So would you have some kind of understanding, if you have not met the requirements this year, do not offer that person for the next year?
Yes, we do. So basically, as already said, all our plot holders sign the ground rules every year. That includes at St Charles Hospital, we have some community beds which are used by specific wards in the hospital or mental health groups associated with the hospital. Every year we review them, we look at all the beds, we make note of beds that have fallen into disrepair or where plot holders may not have been maintaining to the standard that we ask of them. We go through quite a lengthy process to make sure before we reclaim a plot. We make sure, there might be mitigating circumstances, the plot holder may have, coming out of COVID particularly, plot holders have fallen ill, they didn't reach come to the sites, all this sort of thing.
Is it you fix, you pay for the fixing of this?
Yes.
Or leaseholder? or a person
So
who's
the
managing.
fixing of what?
If a plot itself is made of wood and it's
Yes.
falling into disrepair,
We
who's
fix
actually
it.
responsible?
Yes, we fix
You
it.
fix
So
it.
we have an asset register of all the kitchen garden sites. We have been going through it over the last few months, working out our priorities list and working out which funding we can allocate to which. We know that we have, so at the moment on the register there are 57 community gardens that are active. Of those, we know that 10 need some re-engagement and works, and that we haven't been able to visit them as often as we want, and they are on the list to, some of them to have some repair works associated with them. But we also know there's huge demand for them. Most of the kitchen garden sites have a waiting list. We were at the homeowners event last night, and we've asked to put in 6 more. So,
Can I ask a question related to kitchen gardens and also to the school gardening programme?
Yeah.
So obviously a one-off introduction to gardening or planting vegetables is great, but what do we do and what are our ambitions for providing schools with the ability to have regular interaction with gardening and planting vegetables?
So historically, and I should say I inherited this project in April, so I'm still getting to grips with it. So the Community Kitchen Garden Programme, the Schools Engagement Programme for food growing has historically involved building some food growing beds in some of the schools, and then the programme as it currently stands is a long-term engagement with the core schools that are there. So they have fortnightly visits with a gardener who teaches them food growing and where food comes from and harvesting and preparing the food. Some of our other schools have more occasional visits, ad hoc visits, and they maintain the beds themselves. The long-term ambition is that, for me, is that some of the engagement has fallen off due to COVID and various other reasons. So we're currently surveying all the schools to find out what provision they have in their school grounds for both food growing projects, but also general greening and biodiversity projects, and what they would like, what we can offer them, what we can help with. But also, yes, looking in terms of the programme that we deliver, ideally it would be a set number of weeks to be a self-sustaining project then. But there are some big challenges because I'm sure you have one fantastically enthusiastic teacher who wants to lead on it, and then if the staff changes, you can sometimes lose that complete engagement. So we're kind of working out how to.
So the fortnightly sessions you're talking about, that would rely on the teachers at the school?
Well, so we send someone into the school to deliver a session, and they're really popular. The gardener stays all day and sees several class groups over the course of the day.
Okay, well, if the ambition is to expand that to all our schools, that's something I think would be very supportive of, and it'd be good to hear progress. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Burns, and then Councillor Eden-Sands.
Do you do anything with like local youth clubs at all, or is it just the schools? And would you consider?
We would consider. We work with the rugby. They have a community bed in one of the kitchen gardens. I think that's no, that's not true. We also work with children.
I think we had one in Earls Court as well.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, there was a few plots there. I'm not sure they're still in use, but we certainly did look at working with youth clubs as well, and that's something we can definitely ask the community gardeners to focus on.
I think we'd say advocate a refresh, re-engagement with the youth clubs.
I think what I would probably say, to be nice to the officers, that it isn't a huge team, and there is only so many hours in the day, but we're definitely after helping anybody who comes and approaches us. I don't know whether there's enough capacity to go,
But we're currently at one officer
so,
covering
I think we just have to be realistic about, but we're, and in fact we went out and got some money from public health to get some more staff to try and get.
Well, I think in many cases, the youth club, they might be able to find parents, etc., who might be able to lead the sessions.
Exactly.
If we can provide some funding to just get the infrastructure in place, to allow them to do that, if that's what they want to do, then that's less of a burden.
Yeah, we have just started a small programme with what the charity's called, who use church grounds, food growing in church grounds with nursery children.
Right, okay. Yeah, fantastic. Councillor Whittington.
So, if I may, Chairman, two hopefully quite quick ones. Firstly, on trees. I don't see much mention of trees in here, but I'm keen to get to well, I think Councillor Wood, I'm keen to know how involved you get in tree planting, because I think it's very easy, and we're often, whenever we're discussing tree planting with residents, or it was always sort of pushed onto the arboricultural team. And then someone said to me the other day, the thing about tree officers is that they're surgeons, not gardeners. And they're thinking more about maintenance.
Let me stop you there. We get very involved with planting trees. So,
Yeah.
by way of example, in fact, Jenny, who's here, who's principal in Park, is very actively involved with all the tree planting we're doing in Holland Park at the moment, replacement trees. But also, you sat with me and we discussed new trees for Chelsea Embankment Gardens. And probably the most important thing is we're doing the Queen's Green canopy, and I think we've identified over 100. How many? What's the number we've been at?
160 that were planted by March.
So yeah, where appropriate, we always want to plant trees.
And is that all in parks, or do you trees in streets and roads fall under you as well, or is that more?
We're not responsible ones on the roads.
No, we do put fruit trees into the kitchen gardens. Yeah, so
Mostly focusing on open spaces and green spaces and parks.
I think street trees.
Yeah.
But Monica does work very closely with the
Yes, we work very closely. And so when we identify tree planting spaces in parks, they are chosen based on the space, and we do factor in the right tree for the right place. Obviously, that includes trees for biodiversity, and that includes trees for climate resilience as well. So we're doing a lot of work with the trees around that, and making sure that we are future-proofing our tree stock as well. So.
Brilliant. That's delighted to hear that. And just very, very quickly, because we haven't touched on it at all, and I know it's obviously still very important part of your portfolio, Council on culture.
Good, I'm so curious.
Whereas Cornwall might be a share. I'm keen to hear about sporting events like on Exhibition Road and that sort of thing. Are those things is that external stakeholders coming to us and we provide some external support, or how do we go about? Do we initiate any of those, or?
It's a mixture. So in fact, this is a moment for a plug here. It's Exhibition Road this weekend. We'll have a 70-foot rocket, replica of the rocket that's going up in space.
The new Virgin rocket.
Right. So that will be on Exhibition Road this weekend. That was their initiative, but we have supported them and effectively not charged them really for things. So we do absolute facilitation is a big part, but through our arts grants and also through the Kensington Chelsea Festival we started 2 years ago, we also do a lot of our own things. Is that your own thing you want to? So I'm trying to be brief. I've got lots of time.
And so sort of keep the only obvious mention of the festival. Are there other sort of more smaller or little things that we initiate that sort of examples do?
Smaller things apart outside of the.
So like the Exhibition Road Festival, for example.
That they do that, but we work.
Yeah.
The Kensington Festival, there's loads of examples. So down at Wellsend Plaza, there's theatre on every Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, we've done theatre in parks as well. Loads of different types of events.
Yeah, we sort of go out and find.
Okay. Councillor, do you have one more question?
Yes, I have a few, but I'll be very brief. Can we just have a list of these 23 sites? You say first of Carrington Wild Meadows. I have a question because I came across some residents not being happy that we have grass so low, and I approached, I think, Red Squirrel, which maintains one of the estates in Dalgona, and the answer was, this is in our contract. We have to maintain so low.
So was this on an estate or in a park?
Yes, it's one of the estates in Dalgona, but I think this is in the contract, so they must be cutting grass so low somewhere else. And I want to know from a biodiversity point of view why you are cutting grass so low, not introducing any hope for little grasshoppers, bees, or diversity. Even if you go to little scrubs, most of it is just literally open, and you have a little, like maybe 5% of little scrubs. So who is setting that limits?
Without knowing exactly the context of the site you're referring to, it's better on what the site needs. If it's in an estate that's got heavy footfall.
But residents said they want something growing there, and still it's
if there's an area where you think we can put wildflower meadow, please let me know. We can look into
You
it.
send us the details of the estate. It sounds like it's not
It's
under our
outside the
management.
window, outside our council. We're meeting like fourth time, and we're puzzled why you're not introducing anything outside our council. There's a space there, and we're literally not maintained by you.
Do you mean outside
Just
the
literally
library,
outside.
out the library bed?
Yeah.
That is a green roof, which we actually went to a site meeting about this morning.
We are going to be doing
And
that.
it is about to become a more interesting biodiversity.
But just for clarity, the estates, the green spaces on the estates aren't managed by this team, they're managed by housing.
But we're still under biodiversity. We're still under certain improvement funding. So if
Yes,
you want any greening, you will be as a
But it
biodiversity
isn't,
stepping in and helping with that.
Terry might be involved, but it's not Monica's team who manages.
No, she's part of it, yes.
Were you saying it's a Sutton estate?
It's on the Notting Barnes estate, just behind where we had
We work closely with housing management, and they have been really good actually. Wildflower meadows and bee superhighways. So the majority of their planting is really good. So it depends again on the estates,
Would
but
it
it
be
might be
possible for next
more
time
to
to
invest.
literally have a list of the sites and photos so I can see it? Because when I walk around, I hardly can see them.
I think
23 meadow sites.
Yes,
I think we're just sorry, I was stepping in quickly. I'm not sure we can ask for photos of every individual site. That
So
would
at
be
least
quite
their
a
address, I
burden,
can go
but
and see.
certainly we could ask, what the general policy is on the grass cutting. Obviously, I think as Councillor Julie was saying, there is a growing awareness of the benefits of longer grass. So there's no bad thing to review that and to make us aware of what the current policies are.
I would just say in terms of the bee superhighway sites where the wildflower meadows have been planted, the map which pinpoints all of the sites across the borough is going to be published online next month, so you'll be able to see exactly where they all are.
That's
And
fantastic.
they have photos of them.
Well, there we go.
Because
Excellent.
you're
If you can
walking-
share that with us. Yes, go ahead, sorry.
If I can just add one thing, when we're looking at meadows and when we're looking at grass areas, we do have to be mindful that we have very little green space for the size of the population in this borough. And so when we are looking at parks, we're always looking for opportunities to improve and have long grass and wildflower meadows, but we have to look at every site individually, how that site is used, and make sure we have enough amenity grass space for people to still be able to picnic and for informal recreation. So it's always about finding that balance.
It is balance,
Yeah.
it is balance, yeah. Councillor Rush, very quickly, because I'm
Yeah,
being very
it's
vice
just a
chairman.
comment,
I'm gonna sort of run
You
along.
have to answer me back. From residents' point, it's on residents' input, it's about the outdoor, it's fantastic, I use it in Holly Park. I mean,
You'll actually be delighted to hear
yeah,
that.
I mean, see some,
Yeah.
I know you're going to install that in ponds as well. Just on the enforcement part, I know it's beyond the council powers to really go and, find the offenders, people who put nonsense use and things like that. Maybe I think the signboards might help, because I literally on 2 incidents, I rang the park police to come and, deal with the guy who had loud music.
Is this in Holland Park?
Holland Park, yeah. And none of the other tumors, you call it, wouldn't dare to even speak, but I have to, deal with that.
You were a Holland Park enforcement officer.
Yeah.
There's sort of
So I think
clear signage.
clear signage,
No, that's really
or
helpful.
phone number,
Yeah.
call the park police if you see.
Well, I think that's fair point, because people
Yeah.
generally on.
But I'm saying, because I did have a conversation with the park police on that, because they don't have powers to, I don't know whether you.
But they do,
They can
but we
intervene.
we can put that
Yeah,
aside.
'cause people wouldn't call 999 probably, something like that.
Yeah.
They have the Park Police number.
Because a lot of residents raise that, and they use outdoor gyms, so that's something that you take down.
I did, apologies, I forgot to ask on the previous item, but would anyone else who have joined us this evening have any other questions they'd like to raise on this topic? No? Okay, in which case, I would think we'll move on to the next one because we are running behind. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for joining us and for answering all our many questions. So, I'm going to go back to A5 now, electric vehicles. Councillor Kamala and Mr. Chetwynd, welcome to the committee.
A long time.
Yeah. And well, over to you.
Well, this is obviously something that the committee was very keen to see. Electric vehicle charging is not nascent technology, but certainly technology that is evolving. We in Kensington and Chelsea are proud to say that if you exclude the City of London, we are the second highest chargers per capita. I merely exclude City of London because each charger seems to affect their numbers disproportionately than ours. So our provision has been good. We've taken a sort of a stable approach, not committing our own resources too far, and relying on the private sector and government grant funding to roll out predominantly lamppost chargers, but also a number of standalone plugs across the borough. In fact, the lamppost charger is named Chelsea because we were the first borough to implement it. We're also very conscious of the sort of street scene clutter that these chargers could cause, and so we're keen to sort of focus on those which have a design element that sort of suit the council. And that's really been paying off. We've seen, whilst the chart perhaps appears quite flat, the growth in EVs in the borough has been rapid, over 50% in the last year of growth. We are an award-nominated council for our car parking permit policy, which is one of the most progressive, wherein if you emit more emissions, you pay more for your permit. This has obviously reinforced our desire to shift people away from diesel, petrol, and to sort of cleaner forms of vehicles. And it is paying off. There is obviously the sort of the known point that, of course, it is something with a subsidy in order to sort of fund. You offer a discount to those with the cleaner vehicles. We do a similar thing through our pay by phone, where we charge a premium for diesel and a discount for electric vehicles. So we are really keen to promote this. We are seeing a huge amount of take up. I mean, if you convert the amount of electricity per month, so 120,000 kilowatt hours, where a car can do about 4 miles to kilowatt hour, you're talking about 500,000 road miles within the borough and now charged off of renewable sources. That's quite significant. Obviously, we'd like to see that number go much further. It's actually giving us quite good insight into the average number of miles driven by our local resident, because of course we're now able to see exactly how much fuel they're putting into their car. Rapid charging is something where we've been a little bit slower, and that's not through any fault of ours or through officers. It's really that we rely on the TfL framework in order to roll these out. We do have a number across the borough, but I would say the direction of travel in order to achieve sort of electric vehicle take up more widely certainly has to be accelerated. And there's comments there about how TfL will be able to speed that up. That's really all I sort of have to say. There's obviously conversations around the cost of charging as well, and different differential models. But happy to take questions.
Thank you, and start by saying thank you for the report, which covers all the areas connected to EV charging and with a useful amount of detail, so it's been very helpful. I'm going to start off, if that's all right, so we go straight into the rollout plan. So, I mean, I did my own bag packet calculations, and if we have around about 6% of the borough EVs at the moment by parking permit, and it's estimated to go up to 49%. I know that by 2030, I know that's the higher end of the estimate, but we are above average, significantly above average in our EVs in London. So that means we're going from about 2,000 to 16,500 EVs. So if we need the requisite increase, sort of a equivalent proportional increase in charges, that's an 8 times increase. So around about 500 a year in the electricity and maybe 123 in the source. Are we geared up? Is that the sort of numbers we're thinking about? Are we geared up for that? Your thoughts?
I think that, thank you for your introduction, Jem. I think the only point I was going to add was that we are, it's the point I make in the paper, that at the moment we are still responding to residents saying that they would like a charger pretty much as close as possible to their home, understandable and convenience reasons. and we can carry on doing that for a bit. But we are going to have to move to rapid charges because when we've got rapid charges, then I think those numbers that you're talking about, they've got quite different. The profile will be very different because we'll be having that many more vehicles serviced by one rapid charger, particularly when you get to sort of 150 kilowatt hour. You know, the difference between that and a 3 kilowatt charger. So it is the big challenge for us is working out how much we need, when, and what kind. But I do think that, notwithstanding what the report says about how actually usage of the small number of rapid chargers we have at the moment actually fell so far this year, I can't see any way around having to have more rapid chargers, and they will shoulder a lot more of the burden in 5 years' time than they do at the moment. So I don't think we need to just multiply in a kind of linear way from what we have at the moment. And we won't be able to do that.
So we take more of the burden on the rapid. So what is the plan around the rapid charges over the next? Because if we get a year behind, that's twice as much we need to do next year.
I mean, I think I would like to dig into this new software that I only uncovered in the course of writing this paper, if I'm completely honest, to see what that will tell us about the demand and the need for rapid chargers. There is a mention of the ICCT report, which I'm talking about, is it 20 a year, of the rapids, which is significantly more than we have at the moment. And I guess to a certain extent, well, the market will tell us, what it thinks can be justified.
I mean, we've already seen in Fulham, Shell have converted one of their petrol pumps into a fully bespoke EV charger, and they obviously pay for it themselves. They believe the business model is viable. I suspect we'll see more of that on, private forecourts, etc. The report also makes a point around electricity capacity for London. I mean, I'm perhaps less doom-mongering than others, but I don't believe the lights will go out any time soon this winter. But we do need to plan for it, and we, as a council, are already investing in our Pembroke Road facility to install the substation, where we will actually be effectively able to lease capacity out of our depot to surrounding infrastructure sites. So obviously a huge amount of expenditure has to go into this infrastructure rollout. Government can back it so far, but I suppose at some point there will need to be the private sector really taking over. And I think it's worth noting that the owners of most of these charging operators are indeed the energy industry themselves. So as they generate more renewable energy, they're incentivized to sell it to the market. So they are both creator and supplier. So I suspect we'll find that they will make the larger wholesale investments, and we, the council, will be able to avoid having to make costly interventions in the market ourselves.
So as it currently stands with, for example, a rapid charger, is the business case, if we provide effectively, let's say, free of charge access, but free of charge planning to build one, is the business case there for the providers to go and...
I hope it'll be better than that, actually, better than that for the council, because, even with the Source London charge points that we've had since 2013, right from day one, they have paid us a fee every year for the right to operate in the borough. So we've had this kind of mixed economy where for the standalone charging points, the operator has paid us for the right to operate, and then for the lamp column charges, we've paid them to supply the sockets using money that we've got from government grant. And that's what I think is on that point of change where even the slower speed of the lamp column charges, it may be that the business case works out for the operators. They can come to us and either offer a neutral, a fiscally neutral product, or something that actually pays us a
share.
And definitely with the rapids, I think it'll be part of the exercise in choosing who we work with in the borough will be tied down to how much they can pay.
And I will bring in other members of the committee, sounding selfish with the question. The last one, just on this topic, I am conscious that, for example, we passed a motion in full council, I think it was last year, saying, it was a slightly nebulous term, but we did say that lack of charging infrastructure should never be a barrier to someone deciding to switch to an electric vehicle in our borough. And we are leading the way in the country, but we do seem to be plateauing a little bit in terms of number of charges, and so we must be in danger of hitting that point where we are actually a barrier, and we always need the supply in this particular little mini economy. Supply has to stay ahead of the demand, otherwise people just won't buy the EVs.
I'm not. When you talk about plateauing, you're referring to the.
Well, I know the lamp column.
Yeah.
Charts plateauing. I don't know what the projection.
Well, actually, we have just since the paper's written, got September figures, and I'm pleased to say that they're actually the highest we've ever had. So they're about 20,000. If I think it was a summer blip, and we saw it little in some of the other charts as well. So I don't think we're close to plateauing. It seems like there's a steady increase in the number of permits issued for electric vehicles every month. I was checking for a bigger increase this month, new cars, but it seems like it's on a very steady trend. And you're right, that graph does look like that.
But I think it's also using the infrastructure we already have more efficiently. So we mentioned in the report that we've trialled dedicated charging bays. So obviously there's not much point having a charger that's impossible to access because somebody's always parked there. And in that dedicated trial, I'm sure Mark will correct me on the figures, but I believe one of the plugs had only been used 4 times in the previous month, and then that went up to over 100 times in the month preceding and following. So that access to the charging we already have is obviously quite crucial. We can consistently increase the number of lamp columns. We can even look at individual standalone bollards with the plugs in them. As the report says, we could probably do another 1,000 across the borough. Government grant funding may run out, or it may be redirected elsewhere, so we may have to look at the cost of this or work with the operators on providing it. But rolling out more dedicated EV charging bays offers that certainty to somebody that there is always a plug available, and that is something that we will be exploring over the next.
The final comment I'd say on that is just, if someone's buying a new car tomorrow, and making their decision based in part on availability of infrastructure, they will then probably have that car for 6 years, 7 years. So we've lost them as an EV user for 7 years. So it might be that in 2 or 3 years' time, the market has basically solved the supply issue and people are biting our hands off for planning permission to put up new rapid chargers. But in the meantime, let's really put our foot down on everything in our control, converting the bays to dedicated EV only, bringing into play all those remaining lamp column charges that we can do, and really front load that because that's in more of our control. And now I will hand over to Councillor Burns.
Thank you. I was just about to ask about how easy or how hard is it to actually change the lamps to rapid? Could you do that? And what's the process? And can we not sort of ensure or try and get the suppliers to kind of focus on that, so at least we are working with stuff that we already have?
I mean, that would be great if we could, but at the moment we don't even offer what's called the fast charge.
Okay.
So the lamp columns is, I think it's called trickle charge really.
Oh wow.
And we can't even get them in all the lamp columns either. There's no space in all of them.
Right.
So I'm sure that the operators and the developers would love to be able to get that level of service, but I just don't think that's the electric supply to the lamp columns.
And also, just to follow up, what are the sort of other charging methods? I know I've seen like online, there's like in the road sort of magnet, so you charge as you drive. What about that?
Oh, actually, Jeff is the expert. I have to embarrassed to say.
I was an early convert to electric cars.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, so it depends on the technology that the cars are installed with. In street charging is obviously very costly because you have to dig up the road, you have to get the cables in, etc. So I would say we have sort of taken a slightly more delicate approach in our rollout, and that we've gone predominantly for lampposts. We could go for a much more brute force, great big pylons on every street sort of thing, but we also have to balance our own council desire to keep street furniture to a minimum. In fact, getting rid of pay-by-phone boxes gave us 600 pieces of street furniture off the road, so I'm loath to put them all back in again.
Those actually, you don't see it, it's in the road, it's literally like plates in the road, at some
Yeah.
point you see it somewhere, but I don't know, but it doesn't have to be for a very.
It is, and there's different cars will have different technology. I mean, I think something that we should be leading on and working with operators is on vehicle to grid, so where vehicles themselves can put the energy back in. The technology already exists, a number of cars are capable of doing it, but we need to work with operators to make sure that what we install will actually help us with our energy security nationally going forward, because there's a huge amount of capacity in these batteries. And as for the sort of different technologies, that's why we have not yet committed council funding, because we don't want to back the wrong horse and have Betamax or whatever a good example is there, cassettes lying around at the end of the day. So, I think that's our approach. We will see where the technology goes. We may be coming back here in 5 years to say, well, even lampposts now are too slow. We need 18-story tall things that lift the car up and plug a cable in, all sorts of things. But for now, we just want to make sure that we have a variety of offers.
And just one more thing, and then
I'm out.
You for the sort of bay parking and how do you enforce it? I don't know if you said that. I don't know if I missed what you said, but how do you enforce it and how do you get rid of them once they're fully charged? And how long does an average electric car take to charge, just for my interest?
So the bays which are dedicated for EV have a 12-hour limit. Our traffic wardens are obviously empowered to then issue a ticket if the vehicle has been left there. By and large, operators of electric cars, knowing how difficult it can be to find a plug, are quite good at moving. Occasionally, we do all forget. As for length of time, my little car is 2 or 3 hours because it's a very small battery. But on a lamppost, you're looking at around 8 to 10 hours for a reasonable charge. Some cars will have much bigger batteries that could take over a day for the time being. Yeah.
So then they'll be able to drive a lot further.
Quite. Right, thanks. Thank you.
Councillor Whedon-Sands and then Councillor Pidu.
I have a handful, hopefully not too detailed, so hopefully have a bit of a quick fire round. Parking permit, £22. That seems very cheap. How does that compare to other boroughs?
Infinitely more expensive than some in that they charge zero. So we were very conscious that when we changed the parking permit mechanism, we didn't want to overly burden everybody, because everybody pays a £22 base fee for the issuance of a permit. In effect, they're paying zero for the emission of the vehicle. There are zero emissions. However, as cars shift, we do have to keep an eye on the overall envelope of resident parking revenue. We are very keen to keep a discount available for electric vehicles, but as vehicles shift towards it, I'm sure that base rate will increase.
Particularly with inflation.
Well, certainly inflation, but also simply just to make it fairer again. As we have fewer vehicles of high emission, we need to make sure that those with low emissions are paying their share.
The map, whilst obviously very nice to see that there's 100 metre, trying to find 100 metres from near everyone, it's not particularly helpful because obviously population density varies hugely in certain areas. It'd be good to have, I don't know whether a breakdown, whether you want to buy wards or if there's another way of doing it. I guess seeing how sort of many people there are per charger in that area, and also it'd be good to know just in terms of the number of electric vehicles, if there's sort of a breakdown, obviously their registered permits and addresses, where they are, because that would obviously, I think that'd be a bit more helpful.
We do have the permits linked to the postcode as well, so we not only know where our plugs are, we know where the cars are. Obviously, our policy was to make sure there was an equitable spread across the borough. You're right, obviously there are population densities. Your ward certainly probably is doing quite well out of this due to the population decrease you might have seen recently. But there are an awful lot of electric vehicles in wards such as Brompton, Handstown, Queensgate and Royal Hospital. So first we wanted to make sure there was a good blanket across the borough, and then of course you respond to need.
And
one more?
Only one?
Yeah, one more.
Then my last one for now would be on point at the very end of the report. You say council is not funding for private individuals to install public charging because we've not needed to do so. A report, something that I got all the time when out is I want to charge on my street. You obviously mentioned you expect government to sort of start putting out that funding at some point. I'd be very keen for us to look at paying a drum for, for people to be able to actually, if they want, if there's no sort of private space in their property, to be able to put a car, to be able to contribute to, and obviously you want to make it equitable, so you want to contribute to, so you can send them across the borough, but a way for people who have.
So it wouldn't be their own one, they would
No.
just contribute towards the public.
Yeah, on their street, and then maybe one elsewhere. Obviously, if they're paying for a road that you might say is more wealthy or than another road, that obviously does free up the money that we have as a council to then put electric elsewhere. We wouldn't necessarily demand money. So
It does.
it doesn't necessarily,
But I think we would want to make sure the principle isn't simply to offset our council expenditure simply because there's been a benefactor in the area. We should be making sure that the policy condition, be it 100 metres now or whether we make it 50 metres in the future, remains as sort of the bellwether of how we roll this out.
for me to should be it because density obviously.
Yeah. Charges per person. Councillor Judy.
I have very small questions, very small and simple. You mentioned about permits per postcode. Are you able to give me the figure, how many electric cars in North Kensington? How many people own the electric car in North Kensington? So it's one question.
Is that for the 5 wards or which ward in particular?
No, it was all 5. How many people own the electric car? It says here that until now Overland Hollows charging post has been funded by public funds. I understand it's TfL?
It's government grants.
Yeah, we offer it for zero emission vehicles, primarily.
And it's 1,300 per year coming to the council as a revenue on page 41. And this revenue, because it's here as well after, the council also receives an income stream from the free on-street rapid charges, which are funded by TfL. So what I wanted to sort of answer from me is that public is funding those costs, they bring income towards the council, and is this funding once in our council pot used to fund further, or maybe you can introduce some kind of scheme to help people to switch towards electric cars? Do you have something like a scheme which helps and this money could be put forward?
It's not hypothecated in the way that you're talking about, but also just to be clear, the income that we receive, the £1,300, is private sector money. It's not TfL money. So it's not public money. The public money has paid for the lamp column charges, and they don't. But they pay a small sort of transaction fee. They're not paying substantial sums. So the big sums of money that you're talking about, that's paid for by the private operator of the standalone charge points. So it's not that the public is paying for those charge points.
I'm a little bit not quite sure here, which are funded by TfL. So it's only the lamppost itself, right?
The lamp column ones are the only ones where they receive public investment. The standalone source London charging point and the small number of rapid charging points. Actually, the rapid charging points are right, because it was a few years ago they were funded by TfL. The 3 rapid chargers.
The ultra rapid ones.
The 50 kilowatt ones. So the majority of our charging points are either the lamp columns.
So from the revenue, once it's in our pocket as a council, do you have any scheme which helps people to switch to electric cars?
Our scheme is the discounted residence parking permit. So by only charging £22, we're effectively incentivising people to make that switch.
But this is flat rate for everybody, right?
But it's emissions based. So if you go from a large engine diesel emitting 300 grams per kilometre and you go to an electric, you'll be saving £300 a year.
So let's say I have a petrol and I want to change to electric. How can you help me as a
That's how we'll be helping you. You'll be saving money every year
by
by getting a parking permit.
We're running behind. It's no one's fault but mine, but means we must move on to the next agenda item. So yeah, thank you very much. It was very helpful. We move on now to A7, priorities for the lead member for planning, place and environment. Councillor Mark. And yeah, please invite up.
Sorry, just make sure Mark can get home. Yeah, so the priorities are sort of grouped together in facilitation, implementation, and destination. So the themes being facilitation, which is making what we're doing that much easier to do it, and then implementation is more around delivering things, additional things onto our high streets, onto our streets in a better way, I suppose. And then destination is really where we're looking as a council to the future. So that's placemaking, that's good new homes, those sorts of things. So they're broken down into those groups. Obviously, each one has its individual heading, but I'm conscious of time. I'm happy to go straight to questions.
Good idea. Colleagues, Councillor Derry.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Councillor Kamali. 3 questions, so one on graffiti, street washing and design codes. So on graffiti, can you update us on progress of introducing the new streamline system? And I think the priorities report also talks about additional resources, and that's a bit about that. It's not to go to my question. Street washing, can you tell us a bit more exactly what the additional resources will be about? And then on design codes, the more specific question was, is that in relation to the 2 opportunity areas only, or is there also the design code for RPKC, individual wards, individual conservation areas? How would that work? Thank you.
Okay, so on graffiti, the streamlining approach on rendered services has already been implemented. So our contractors are currently painting over graffiti where they find it at no cost to the resident, beyond obviously the council tax. But currently, one of the issues we're finding is that it's hard to make all the paints match. So they are expanding their palette of colours to match the different homes in the borough. We have difficulty on sort of brick surfaces. They're a lot more labour intensive to clean. The passing of Her Majesty sort of coincided with the change of this streamlined approach. So just as we were very keen to sort of get going, we obviously had a huge demand on resource for the funeral. But what we did find actually was that we were able to clean Cromwell Road, the bridge across Cromwell Road. And we also sort of learned that actually we're not responsible for that bridge. We're now able to recharge TfL for the ongoing maintenance and cleaning of it. For brick surfaces, we are still looking at how we can streamline it even more. The same message has been given to operatives, but because the likelihood of damage is that much greater, we're being a bit more cautious. That said, there are plenty of rendered surfaces that we need to get to in the interim in any case, so I'm confident we'll be able to then, by that point, get on with the brick. As for additional resource, we have an item for the next financial year to double the capacity of the team, which is from 1 to 2 people. That will mean, coupled with the streamlining, that will be able to doubling of the capacity. That said, there is still difficulty in recruiting in the sector, and we're actually trying to bring this forward as well. So what we're doing is working with Pembridge Ward, who are very keen to tackle some of the leftover graffiti from Carnival. They're looking at whether they could fund it through NSIL or CLL to try and kickstart that work this year, meaning by the time April comes around, that operative would then be able to work across the borough elsewhere. And then your next point was on jet washing. The contract we have with Suez allows for twice yearly jet washing of our busier roads. I'm sure Terry can add more detail, but having only just renewed that contract, I sort of was quite aware of it. What we found though really is that there's been an increase in the amount of food and beverage businesses across the borough. They're leaving greasier items on the street. There's a general feeling that there's a shift in the quality of our streetscape. So what we're having to do is adapt to make sure that we can get it back to the standards we're used to. This will also mean a doubling of the service, and actually this additional team will be able to be used on slightly more aesthetic cleanliness regimes rather than just the standard twice a year service we do for our high streets. They'll also be able to work with the bids are willing to contribute, so we'll be able to do high streets with them, and we'll also be able to sort of tackle problem spots outside of restaurants around high streets where we know there's sort of grease build up. Very final point on design codes, where we've already done a design code that wasn't for the opportunity areas. We've done one for Lots Road, around the site, whether in Chelsea Riverside, around the site of the council's land. We are very keen to expand design codes. They're obviously government policy, but also they're just good policy for the borough. We have beautiful buildings. We need to make sure that any new building is in keeping with the design of those that are already around them. So yeah, we're very keen.
Where was it published, the design codes?
The Lots Road one was published on our key decisions, but yeah, we could probably create in the same way we list conservation areas, we could probably list design codes.
Design codes was published last, so that was the first one, and as we go forward and produce more, then that'll be on our planning page.
And yes, I was going to ask on the design. Is it another design code?
No, it's on the graffiti.
Okay, so on the design code, which I know would be of great interest to Councillor Durant, the Earl's Court shopfront design code. What's the timeline on that, and can we get it at the committee in some form to
So that's sort of being spearheaded by Councillor Rendell through the placemaking team.
Right.
I don't know if you have a timeline on that, but it's one of his key priorities. He's very keen. He's receiving funding from an organisation whose name escapes me now, but he's very keen to crack on.
I'm sure the ward councillors outside of this committee will want to engage on that, but if the committee has the opportunity to input into that, that would be fantastic.
I just briefly want to check on the additional graffiti and the street washing resource. Is that both still delivered by sewers, essentially? Are we paying them for doing all of that?
So we've got the new contract, which does include that as well, but as Jeremy was saying, we're looking at increasing that resource even more.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you. Just going to the restaurants and high street situation where there's like loads of grease and road stuff on the roads, at what point do you make the restaurants actually pay for that? Because if you're doing like twice a year cleaning, that's not going to cut it if they're doing it every day. Obviously they have, when you have rubbish, they get penalised, fine. But what about actual just greasy, grubby streets?
So yeah, much less.
So yeah, it's a really good point, and it does seem to be a growing issue as well. So one of the approaches we take is issuing a Section 47 notice. So that basically sets out how a business should present their waste, and also how it should be kind of contained as well. So if they're not doing that, then they can be fined. So fixed penalty notice can be issued, and if kind of cleaning is required, then again that can be recharged to the business. So we've issued around 150 those Section 47 notices over the summer, so really kind of up the ante on that as well.
And I should say we're also keen the businesses themselves
Yeah.
procure jet washing services either through us or through another party, so that, you know, as is very custom practice in Japan, you keep your shop front clean.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Eden Sands.
I'm going to continue on to talk rubbish.
Shock.
Is it my understanding that without issuing a Section 47, we can't enforce against businesses? Is that correct?
That's must be the easiest process to go down.
Right.
So there's a CPN route, which is very kind of
So why don't we issue Section 47 notices to all businesses automatically upon being established?
It's a good question. So we were looking at that. There needs to be some kind of reason really for that. So we could do a borough-wide kind of Section 47. It's never been done before, so it's something. Well, we're not aware of it anywhere in the UK.
Yeah.
It's mostly not in the nature or the spirit of the Section 47 notice. It should be there as a bit of a stick to say, look, you aren't performing, therefore please do, rather than issuing it as a kind of a general warning, I suppose. But it's something I'm happy to investigate.
Yeah. Just because without it, you're then in theory not able to, they start doing, you've got them washing pavement before you're able to do anything.
Yeah.
Because then you into the Section 47.
We just need legal's opinion on that, whether that is actually possible
Yeah.
to do, because that's more than like a PSPO type.
Of course, that's something I would, or even just on high streets, like you have small shopping areas, obviously, but just, key shop, I think that's something that really.
But I suppose it would also be making sure businesses are aware that they're under that
Yeah,
registration as well. So obviously by issuing it directly, they can't avoid it, but if they just open a business, they may not be aware that there's already this.
Exactly that. And then also, it's great to hear that you're issuing more FBNs. I'd like to just ask in terms of the actual process of enforcement. So, for example, in my ward, as you know, CLLM was spent on a camera that was put up that was then never used, and now the process of we find out that the process of trying to find footage on that camera seems to be rather laborious, and you don't have manpower for it. It's sort of, it seems like a waste of CLL money to put the camera there in the first place. But it does seem that there's not much. There were missing conversations between tax departments where how we could more effectively crack down on things. As I say, rather than having somebody else approve putting a camera up that then doesn't get used for a year, and then when we realise we can use it, it's the process of using it is so difficult. What are you, from your side, what are the sort of challenges you talk about, you think about when you're thinking about enforcement and trying to catch these people and clamp down on?
It's a really good question, I suppose, and there is possibly more work that we can do around kind of joined up working between the different enforcement functions. We've just got to be really mindful around CCTV. It doesn't solve all problems, and we can't kind of focus it on private residents and stuff, or housing, buildings like that. It's got to be more kind of general street stuff. And if you see someone just come along and dump a bag, it's just a person. It's how do we identify that person? So we've just got to, it's around what evidence it can provide us. At the moment, it's kind of very light evidence. You basically witness someone putting the waste there. It doesn't identify that person. It doesn't say where they come from. So it doesn't give the full picture, I suppose, around the issue that's taking place. So I think Bristol CCTV does have a role, but I think we've just got to investigate a little bit more around how it can be most effectively applied.
Have you given any more thought to wanted posters? I know that's one of our child putting up that I think would be quite an effective way of, if there's a regular fighting spot and someone is the same person putting up, it seems an easy way to.
Maybe I want to bring LCDs with these.
I think it's worth consideration. I've also seen some signs in the media where they sort of using psychology, say I dump waste here because I am a selfish person, B, don't care about my community, etc.
I'm personally okay with them, I suppose. I think we do need to remind ourselves of what we want our streets to look like, and whilst a bin bag on the street is not very appealing, covering every lamppost in the borough with "please don't put your bags here" signage is probably also equally unappealing. So a bit of a balance. We're obviously pushing now on issuing tickets. Let's see if that's had a good an initial impact in driving down repeat offence. We will also be looking at ways that we can sort of resource the team better in order to deliver more of a service. So whether that's we piloted a number of years ago in Earls Court an a way of issuing tickets for other forms of littering, and the service was cost neutral, but then you run the risk of issuing tickets to people that have dropped a cigarette or chewing gum, or people that really didn't mean to cause litter. So we have to be conscious of what we're saying when we issue a ticket. Obviously, in the cases of bags left on the wrong day, they've clearly broken the rules, but there's a balance to be struck between sort of the revenue that might be derived from ticketing, but also the public perception of the borough.
Is it on this subject? Okay.
All I do is talk about the fantastic new policy that we brought in terms of making it easier to issue FBNs. What recourse do we have? So, for example, because obviously people try and scratch out their names and addresses. If you get the address, there is an address, but you scratch out, if they've managed to scratch out their name or it's unintelligible, can we look at alternative recourses of, finding the leaseholder? If they're renting out the place, surely you find the person who owns the property, they tell their tenant, stop.
What happens
dumping.
with cars, isn't it? If you don't identify the driver, the car.
Exactly, so that we can actually, make that as effective as it can, because, people can be quite effective at scribbling their name out. So I'd encourage you to push. I
think we can look at
as far as we
alternatives as
can.
well. Yeah, definitely, and it is a discussion we need to have with legal as well to see what would stand up in court.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's all. Councillor Jadot and then Councillor Nutt.
Very sharp. Do you know the deal, how much was for cleaning after Notting Hill Carnival? So,
It's built into
Part of
the
the
standard contract now, so from when we procured the new contract in
Mhm.
2021, that's part of the contract.
okay, so it's not extra because of an event happening, you'll be still picking up the same.
I mean, we do pay for it through the
Yeah.
contract, but it's not, we don't get another bill. Yeah.
I got it now. Because what I wanted to say is I gathered from different councils what I researched that actually leaving rubbish on a street, we all know and we see because we're living on the streets, passing by, it's antisocial behavior. What if we push for leaving graffiti as an antisocial behavior and criminal damage? If you are as contractors able to clean after carnival, which includes paint, like this year, I think this should be extended that you will pick up the graffiti as well and will pay for that as a council. Because I can understand very easily that you want to change some owners, however, some of them in parks on Virgin Islands, you will never have it. So maybe, if there is possible to speak to the owner, introduce in funding for sealants. What I have now in mind is Freddie Mercury's house, one of the councillors working there, and obviously there was a huge problem because everybody wanted to leave a metal already. And obviously the owner was not particularly impressed with it, so just make a sealant, you see. So there is always a way to talk whoever you can get hold of the owners and say maybe INSO will help. So this is funding from our forum. But I think I would be still more happy if this picking rubbish will be extended to dealing with graffiti because it doesn't really take a lot to you know what I mean, remove especially from bus stops which are not
So
nice.
Councillor Jadot put the question.
Can you expand more than less?
We do graffiti removals through.
So there is a graffiti removal service the council has, which removes it from the council street furniture, also from residential properties as well. Businesses we do after carnival, but we are working more closely with
So
businesses.
you are removing the graffiti.
Yes.
So if I have quite a long list of graffitis in, so you will deal with that. And you will not say this is TFL property and this land belongs to TFL. You will go and literally will tackle that.
Depends on the building. Yeah, I mean, this is what, we have a backlog of
Because
graffiti.
my
which is why
memory
we're
on the phone
increasing.
is literally,
I understand, but
It's not
which
grown
is why we're increasing the team to get on top of the backlog. Obviously, graffiti, Notting Hill Carnival does create a lot of graffiti every year, so we're going to make sure when we have this additional resource that, you know, they'll be tasked August, September.
and a question, because I know what you're getting, but I have to ask.
Yeah.
If, for
TFL areas
instance,
are tricky.
if for instance there is a property which is run by council, right? And there's a big wall that is a council run estate.
Mhm.
Are you not able to go with the greening team and just literally put some shrubs, some holly, make it access more difficult?
What we're doing.
Yeah, there's 4 sites down Portobello Road where we're actually going to green the walls, which are really
I
prone to
agree, throw it
graffiti.
on it, it helps with the biodiversity.
Or rambling rows or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a number of initiatives we're going to be taking. So there's
Would you be
increased
able to
removal,
employ-
greening, and anti-graffiti.
But we have to be conscious of the cost of the council. We can't just infinitely increase the service. So what we do need to do is look at ways of getting businesses or residents even to sort of sign up to us so that we will clean their homes for them, clean their businesses, so that we can actually manage this.
Would you be keen to employ professional artists who will make beautiful painting, like I see somewhere, you know, some headshot or something like that, to literally steal this area from graffiti?
I suppose one person's graffiti is another person's art. I don't know, or vice versa.
There might be a place though for specifically commissioned murals.
We've just got to be mindful with graffiti there. So there's the big bridge that goes from kind of opposite the Tesco's on West Cromwell Road. We cleaned that bridge on the Queen's funeral. It was cleaned one night.
Do you
We
put any
came back the
sealants?
next morning and it was completely covered again. We went back the next night, cleared it, again completely covered it and cleared it. So it is this ongoing battle we have. So it is really bad at the moment, tagging, and it is across kind of the whole of London, it seems. So we've just got to be mindful that it's not going to be an easy one to
Is it
solve,
to-
but we are going to try
To speak
a lot
with
more.
the local safe neighborhood team to monitor and just literally put some hefty fines?
We're working with
But this is
safety
criminal
team and the
damage,
police as well.
right? It's really
Yeah,
drying our pocket.
It's, yeah, absolutely.
I want to bring in Councillor Noak.
It'll be quick.
Waiting,
It has been
time.
badly covered. I think it's quite frustrating. Is my example is Council House, which is just at the end of Glasgow. There's a cameras. I know the rubbish collection in our borough. That's good job. I mean, they collect on time, they design. But there's other rubbish that come that, we will normally come nighttime and just dump it. But there's a camera in that building from time to roundabout. And that's got the council control. It's not your department, it's a properties. It will only take maybe 10-15 minutes to look at that camera. We'll show you the car registration, the times of dumping.
Yep.
And if those people get fined, or maybe even the police involved, that would end. But it creates other issues of, the rats in the area. Because the rubbish is there.
I think it's obviously a priority for the year ahead. We're increasing the money the council is spending on this. We have to be honest, we're not going to get to every single site in the borough. You're right, we do have a great waste collection service, so we do invariably pick everything up anyway. But bit by bit, by cracking down on people, hopefully we will then be able to have the time to go after slightly trickier cases as well. But I agree.
The use of cameras in that situation is actually very beneficial, because if you've got the vehicle registration number, then we can trace the person. It's when it's an individual, it makes it very, very hard. So if they've got a vehicle and we can trace that vehicle, then we can issue.
And I've seen it personally, someone's just looking around, but I have no authority to challenge. It's about, the personal risk as well.
Yeah, well, I think where we have that evidence, that's the point of having the cameras there. And the committee, from what we said, would be very supportive of your robust approach to tracking those people down, especially where we've got a number of plans. I think we'll move on, unless there are any other questions, to the final.
The last case, if you know that on a estate, let's say it's a Peabody estate, which is housing association, there is a camera, and somebody complain, are you speaking with Peabody to literally pull that evidence from them and to prosecute? How does it work? Do you know what I mean? Are you actually chasing those cases? If I, for instance, report to you on the street this is done, and obviously there is camera in the middle of the Peabody, are you able to liaison with, I don't want to mention the name?
We can do, but we're not at the moment, because we're not aware of the problem. So what we need to do is be highlighted of the issue. If there is fly tipping on the street, and if there is access to any kind of camera footage, then yes, we can investigate that.
So you can investigate not only people with rubbish, but also if
it's on the public highway, then we can investigate that. If it's on the estate itself, then that's down to Peabody.
Yeah.
We've just got to use our enforcement.
By the way, Peabody, they're worse in resolving issues.
They're improving. I can say that. I work with them, they're improving.
Final point very quickly, Councillor.
So about net zero planning, new home delivery.
On food waste.
On food waste.
I'm interested to see where this is being rolled out. First, but secondly, I'd say I just would want to be very careful. Well, I'd like to know how the Western Riverside Authority deal with food waste. Because I know there are other boroughs have introduced this, some of them almost a decade ago, and then withdrew the service because it was felt that actually the methods of disposal of food waste was no better environmentally than going in with normal waste. So I think this is a very expensive service. It's an extra collection, presumably.
Is it value for money?
Is it value for money? B, are we making sure that the Riverside Authority, particularly now that we're no longer sharing it, make sure that they're disposing it as environmentally friendly as possible, and where is it being rolled up to? This trial scheme.
Good question. So we can share a map with you for the new rollout area. So I'm kind of doubling the food waste collection. At the moment, it's collected in kind of 23-litre caddies. So you give a little 5-litre caddy to each resident. They have that in the kitchen. Then we empty that into a bigger kind of 23-litre caddy, and that's put out on the collection day. We've got a separate vehicle that does go around and collect that. At the moment, you're right, Western Riverside Waste Authority doesn't dispose of food waste, so we take it to an area in North London, to an aerobic digestion plant, where that gets turned into kind of soil conditioner and heating fuel.
But it should also be on the value for money element. We pay per kilo of waste that we take to Western Riverside, and food waste is one of the heaviest elements of that. So whilst the economics might not be there quite yet, doing enough of it will eventually mean that we save money in what we take to Western Riverside. And I can also highly recommend food waste disposals in the sink, because then it becomes Thames Water's problem rather than the council's.
So we don't pay. We're taking
It's 100 if it's collected as general waste and disposed of via Western Riverside as general waste. It's £160 a tonne. If we take it to the AD plant, then it's around £55.
That's run by North London Waste Fund.
I think it's private.
Right. It's of interest because
Standalone.
I know that Barnet took a view, having rolled out in 2013 across the borough of food waste. In 2018, the council did, because the anaerobic digestion was actually not in any way environmentally better than that. But if yours more cost effective, then you have a different arrangement.
It's an argument to be had around whether it is more environmentally friendly. It depends on the round itself and how far it takes to kind of transport.
It's the issue of having a diesel lorry picking up separate round food, but just on the numbers Terry's quoting, it's obviously quite good value for money.
Okay. And residents did ask for it as well. It used to be quite unpopular, but now it's become very, very popular. So more residents ask for it.
I was going to say, residents ask for it. How do they sort of know about it? Just through their friends, their neighbours? Like, is there initiatives? What's going on?
Yeah, so there's only set rounds at the moment within the borough. So everyone, when these rounds are introduced, obviously they're informed of it, they're given the relevant caddies. And then the new round that we're proposing as well, there'll be some leaflets that are dropped off, some door knocking as well that will take place, and then obviously they'll be informed when the caddies delivered.
Thank you.
Okay.
Fantastic. Curiosity, because we talk so much about nature. You mentioned
Councillor, to make it very, very brief, because we must get on to the final item.
you spend this money for a ton, but you mentioned they turn into fertilizers later on. So if someone has a garden, would it be not nicer to introduce them to idea for leafleting? You can maybe recycle if you have a garden to use it in your garden as a fertilizer. Will it save you any money that way?
It's soil condition. What we do encourage residents to compost if they can themselves, rather than
Do you
give it
have a
to us.
leaflet I can get hold of? Because I know some people who would be interested, so.
Yeah, we
I
got
can-
some composting. We subsidise home composting as well, so you get 25% off a composter. It's just having space. A lot of people don't have the space to do that.
Because we have the kitchen gardens, yes, I can just see how we can actually benefit ourselves, because you pay somewhere, actually we can reuse on another project within the council.
Provide
Yeah.
councillors should you
Yeah.
that information and
Sorry, I know where
access.
I'm
Yeah,
going.
provide access to those leaflets, that'd be fantastic. Right, we move on to item A8. Councillor Pascal, would you like to join us? Yes. Sorry for keeping you waiting so long. You diligently.
It's something I've been waiting on for about 45 years. I used to work in the Department of Environment on it.
Right, I'm tempted to say, well, if you'd like to introduce it, please do. There's questions from Councillor Dawson Park.
Do you want to introduce it? Well, I mean, I can.
Yes,
I can
go
do you want
for
to
it,
introduce my report and my reaction to this?
Well, I was going to first start, say,
Where do you want to start?
well, Ms. Rollout, did you author the report?
Yeah, this is basically a response to.
Sorry, not the report, sorry, did you author the response?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you or Councillor Kamali would like to do a brief introduction to the response, and then we'll go.
Yeah, so it was a report that Councillor Pascal produced as chair of the Environment Select Committee when he chaired it, looking at obviously net zero and our 2030 target, and came up with a number of recommendations which I wanted the leadership team response on, and the report kind of sets out our response to those and the recommendations that were made. I think most of the recommendations are followed. There's a few kind of nuances, I suppose, around how we have responded, but overall, I think we're in support of all the recommendations in the report.
So I'm going to start with Councillor Pascal. Would you like to lead us off?
Our challenge when I had your job last for a couple of years was to address the council's commitment to become neutral in all its own operations by 2030. Just to put that into context, the borough generates, the borough's carbon footprint is roughly 1% of the RBKC's footprint is about 1% of the borough's footprint. To sort out the RBKC footprint will cost in the order of about £150 million. We've committed to do that by 2030. The progress to date has been extremely small. We have 7,500 council housing units plus the operating buildings of the council that constitute 90% of that job. So that's where the £150 million comes from. It's just to give you an idea of the scale in the context of some of the other conversations that are going on tonight. And the pace that's required since 2030 is only 7.5 years away from now. So it equates to, if we were to do this programme and achieve the objectives that we've said we will, it's a £20 million a year commitment from that. It wasn't £20 million a year to start with, but it is now because of the lack of achievement to date. So we have to ramp it up and take it off to June. Firstly, I wanted to thank my fellow ESC members for these 2 years, but particularly the officers, both in support of the committee, but also officers that work throughout the council, from legal to procurement to environment to all sort of housing, etc. All into engagement with us as a committee on that. And the person who I'm going to embarrass particularly deserves a particular mention is James Downer, who's sitting at the end of the table, because he was consummate in supporting the Helping Bright Pay. He wrote a 1,000-page report and condensed it down into the 16 pages, which if you could provide a link, James, to the members of this committee, you can read it. It's not in your papers today, but this report is 16 pages long, and it has access through links to 1,000 pages of background material that will be up after that, which we access ourselves. The first thing I wanted to, the next thing I wanted to say was I also wanted to welcome the leadership, Jem Kwali and supported by Terry Oliver, but the whole leadership team. And their response to this paper has been really extremely serious and grown up and ambitious. And I really want to welcome that. Going through the recommendations, which were in general, in principle, I think, all accepted, but there are some nuances, but I think they're worth teasing out a couple of things. Recommendation 1, which you have before you, which was to focus on EPC B, which would recommend a higher level of insulation, because it did 2 things. First of all, it got the climate change to a point at which you could later on put in such devices as heat exchangers and so on to do the energy supply. But it would also, in parallel to that, reduce our susceptibility to fuel poverty, because there are a significant proportion of our population that cannot afford to pay for any heating, and that's not a new phenomenon. We haven't been able to do it for years. As I said, when I worked in Whitehall, long before I got white hair, the situation was exactly the same. But basically, the more you insulate a property, the warmer that person is in that property when they don't put the heat into it, other than the lights they have on, the cooking they do, and their own body heat that they give. And it reduces the fuel poverty problem enormously. So the response has said basically that the aim is going to be to go to EPCC because the money is not available. And that is a realistic observation, that it is going to be very difficult for the HRA to raise £100 million over the next 7.5 years to achieve the target of 2030. There's going to be a big push to do it. There'll be some government money towards it, and there's a lot of work going on in medium-term financial strategy to get engaged with that. The next thing was to recommend that we delay the implementation of heat pumps. simply because we regarded those as a lower priority, less cost effective than going for investing in insulation. A very good point has been made in the response, though, that if the grant is made available from central government or the mayor or whoever, it would be churlish of us not to take it out and put some heat pumps in. And certainly there should be exemplar or demonstration projects or particular estates where this is done if we can obtain external funding. So I totally accept the sort of partial yes to that. The next point was that the HRA's planning should be engaged very quickly with regard to medium-term financial strategy. The HRA financial review came out at the beginning of this council year, and medium-term financial strategy was going to be reviewed by summer. The comment has been back, yes, but this engagement with regard to will be, instead of August, it will be probably January as a response. And I think that's realistic with the change of circumstances we've had, also disrupted Ukraine war, and etc., and the energy crisis. R4, this is where there's been a, sorry, there was a misunderstanding here. We said that we proposed that any offset that is paid by a project that cannot achieve net zero by 2030, that the council should pay, in effect, a penalty for that. It can't be an external charge. It has to be an internal provision within the accounts. What we meant by the way we worded it was that money should be kept within the council and redirected back towards achieving higher levels of energy conservation in net zero, contribution to net zero. The analysis and the response says there are dangers to do with involving ourselves investing in trees in the Amazon or wherever, which I totally agree with, because some of these forests in the Amazon have been cut down 3 times. They've sold the permits of 2 or 3 times. It is our mistake in drafting, and I'll take that personally, not object, is that we should have put the words and redirect the hypothecated money back to RBKC ring-fenced investment in achieving net zero. So I think we're broadly in agreement on that one too. The consultation, R5, consultation double glazing, I understand is going to happen within the next month or so. I think it's extremely important. It's not strictly within 2030, it's more to do with 2040. Some 70% of the borough has conservation areas. Within the conservation areas at the moment it's very difficult on planning to put double glazing in, etc. For good reason, because it will spoil the feel of the place. If we have a proper, you can do it if you do it according to this design guide approach. In other words, there's a conforming way of doing it and a non-conforming way, so it can police.
You don't need to apply for planning permission.
I would be happy with that, provided there is a rigorous design guide as how you can do it. And it's got to have detailed drawings and so on, because and we should engage with people, organisations such as the Glass and Glazing Federation, who have most of the glazing manufacturers involved in this membership. They would very much like to get involved in something like this because it'd be good business for them, as long as it was done to a standard, and then it wouldn't wreck our residential conservation
The more
areas.
prescriptive we are, the easier it makes.
Yes, then we don't have to police it so much. Yeah. The tighter the design codes for doing it, the less there will have to be any policing, the less concern there will be from many of our very active associations. R6, which was to make sure that all carbon zero was put into was a carbon zero report with regard to any procurement. And I understand that is a work in progress. As we have an equality statement on any major project, any KD, there should be also a carbon zero conformities appraisal done at the same time. And then R7, which was to align the ESC review process with the audit transparency. That has been agreed to, subject to the fact that obviously audit transparency and ESC are both independent of the officers and are independent of each other. But there has been a very useful, was last year, a very useful conversation that I had with the chair of audit transparency, who went through it with their officers and the external auditors and put it on the risk register. And it's just that kind of interaction and alignment to make sure that what is being proposed here for good environmental reasons is also, there is a long-term risk, because the asset value of properties the council owned and the non-conforming that national government requirements in the future are going to make for an effective deficit, reduce the capital worth of properties. So there is a risk, not only in non-conforming with legislation, but a financial consequence of that as well, if we don't align those provisions. So I'm very grateful to Jem and his officers for addressing this in a very positive and serious and also realistic way. I think the challenge is going to be pace at which this is done. So I think what we did, handing over to you, Tom, is that we run the first lap, and you guys have got to do the next lap of what is going to be a marathon.
Absolutely. That's a very good way to put it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Would you have any, before I move to the committee, do you have any questions on that you want to put to Councillor Kamali or?
Well, I suppose discuss that question about pace.
I think it's a fair point to raise. Obviously, when we made our climate emergency declaration in October 2019, the different world we were living in then, there was no COVID, there was no war in Ukraine, there was no energy crisis. Obviously, some of the steps we're taking actually directly benefit the borough as well. So insulating properties, which is one of the earlier priorities, will not only save residents money, it will also help with global climate change, but very much more locally, it will save our residents money in heating their homes, keeping them warm. And obviously with the differential in the cost of energy at the moment, it has a much quicker payback on some of these things. So you mentioned windows, we obviously we've already done listed building consent for solar panels, we'll be doing one for glazing. You're absolutely right, we've got to be very prescriptive on that, but listed buildings where you have to be that much more sensitive are a good place to start, because it means if it can work for a listed building, it can definitely work for a conservation area. We're now also in discussions with a manufacturer of slate effect solar panels to look at whether we could simply allow them to be used borough-wide. We'll have some being delivered to the town hall. And then you would literally be able to replace every grey roof in the borough with solar panels if the resident so chose. There is a huge cost to this. I think we have to be very conscious of that. Kim, in managing the HRA, has seen construction costs balloon over the last year or two. There is a benefit in doing this economically. It means in the longer run, the HRA will be more self-sustaining. But the deadline of 2030 and the equilibrium point where those investments pay off are now slightly out of kilter. So he's having to make decisions as to which schemes to bring forward. We're obviously doing the sort of district heating network at Lanc West. That will have a payback period over a number of years. But yeah, the general recommendations are all excellent. That's why we supported them. But it is an enormous challenge, especially for the borough as a whole.
I think it's a challenge for the nation and all of us, but if we don't do it, the cost of not doing it will be even greater.
On recommendation 1, the response seems to be saying we're not going to adopt EPCB either. It doesn't quite say that in as many words, but it seems to imply we're not going to adopt B, we're just going to go for C in new developments as well as existing. Is that the case? And if so, is that not going to make it hard for us?
That was really Kim and James Caspel at Lanc West had done sort of a project on Verity Close where they threw everything at a terraced house in the borough to try and get it to passive house or A, and after over £100,000 of expenditure, I think it still came back with a B. So, and that was with solar panels, heat pumps, insulation, mechanical heat extraction systems. It had the works, and we still got to a B. So I think the realization was that it's better to get everybody to a C than it is to get a few homes to a B for the same amount of money. That said, the energy mix of the grid is changing as well. So whilst you may be still leaking energy, of course, if that energy is generated in a renewable fashion, from an emission standpoint, I appreciate from a cost to the user, it's the same, but from an emission standpoint, it's less harmful than leaking gas-powered electricity, heat.
One of the things that was learned from Verity Close too was just the difficulty in finding contractors and individual labourers and skilled, people on sites who are actually capable of installing something. So they had, for instance, some triple basin they put in a frame that was also very well insulated. It was put in the wall in such a way that it leaked around the outside of the frame. So most of the advantage of triple glazing was lost because the guys on site weren't actually up to doing it.
Skills necessary, yeah.
So there is a learning curve.
Yeah.
You know, beyond the parameters that we've been looking at in basic science.
The report does touch on it as well as there's kind of more sophisticated measures, kind of EPC rating, because that is quite a basic way of measuring things. So it is looking at kind of heat demand and air tightness as well, which get better results, to be fair. So it's looking at those different matrices.
So how close to net zero are the new homes we're building? About to build? I know that
I don't believe they won't be net zero insofar as it depends exactly where you define zero. There's obviously a cost of material construction which has an embedded carbon attached to it. Once they're built, I believe they'd probably be B or C rated, but I need Kim to answer that.
Well, if we could get some more information to the committee, we're stepping a little bit on housing's toes here, but I think it is relevant to this committee via this report. What are the insulation and net zero requirements on the new builds where we actually have control, because retrofitting is so much harder than and if we haven't gone for B, you know, what's the cost reason behind that?
On your question of other committees, that's certainly Kazim and Ali and I worked very closely together on Warmer Homes and across the two committees, and it may be that this is an area you might choose to interact some way with the housing.
That's a good idea, and would be keen to raise that.
I was just going to follow up. So basically all the new planning permissions and the new buildings being built, are you enforcing, what are you actually enforcing? Is there any enforcement to make it more eco-friendly?
So the larger projects all have to comply with what will be our local plan and the London plan. There are mechanisms involved where they can pay sort of a carbon tax in effect for the development. It's a shame Amanda's left because I'm sure she knows the numbers off by heart. But if they're not up to the standard, there is a MECA fee recovery mechanism.
Do they have to correct that, or do they just pay?
They pay, and then we collect it through.
Okay.
So all the new builds have to be as kind of fuel efficient as possible, or near as net zero as possible. Then there is an offset mechanism that kicks in, and again, most of that needs to be delivered on site if possible. If not, then the developer can pay a certain amount of carbon offsetting, which the council receives, and then we can look at kind of carbon reduction measures.
And I think it has been raised quite significantly in the last update.
I think it's around 1,800 tonnes.
Oh, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Do we have a data about the solar panels, like how many were about, and if it's compulsory for new development to have solar panels? Because more or less I just literally see together about SATs tried to introduce because of the flooding. Do we have something like a scheme to help residents to access solar panels? And in the same time, I will see rather solar panels than a graffiti.
Yes. Obviously the graffiti we didn't pay for, but yes, so there is North Kent Community Energy, of which I am a shareholder. It is effectively it raises. Sorry?
Can we visit?
You can visit the
Can we
site.
organise for us, because we had a recycling visit, can we organise this for you?
There's a couple of routes.
There's Dogano Community Centre.
So what they do is they raise money through sort of a public offering in effect, and then once the money's raised, it pays for the solar system to go on the building, and then over time, the people that put the money in get money back out. But obviously, the building then saves a lot of energy.
The biggest solar collector in the borough is upstairs.
The same about SATs and schools, SATs and churches, just to really make them more green, because as you say, we have money for that. It's just a matter of awareness, of leaflets, of talking to people, knocking on the door. What have you been doing so far about your electric bills? I think there's the Green Doctor, and I know that Dalganosh hosts these surgeries as well. But on estates, now we're talking about council estates. Notting Barnes had roof pitched in here. It was, I think, a good possibility to make the SATs green roofing. At the same time, maybe think how our estates run by the council can actually benefit from this funding to make residents who live there benefit from a green energy.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about
Just so there's two projects. There's Solar Together, which is a pan-London project which looks at kind of group buying around solar panels to make it cheaper for residents and easier for residents, private residents. We're also looking at social estates as well through the North Kensington community energy model. So Silchester Estate, we're just exploring the routes there just to see whether we can install solar panels. That's again part funded through the Future Neighbourhoods Fund that we've got.
And there wasn't, I mean, I think as a select committee, our best experience in terms of visit was going to Lake West. Because at that time, and I'm talking about a year or more ago, that was the estate that engaged, the officers had engaged directly with people living there. And they've been involved in developing, specifying the scheme as to how their estate should be brought to a more climate friendly and better to live in arrangement. So the refurbishment of Lank West is one of the case studies that we've got in our work. Okay. So that's worth a visit too. Because you organised a visit for the whole committee to go there.
It will be very interesting just to see where you left it and what has been done so far, and how can we pick it up and make it on the longer run, as you say, whoever comes after us.
And because it's council stuff, when we're talking about a programme that's got another 7.5 years to run, it's not just how far it's gone so far, it's the pace increasing, because obviously you can't start a big 7,500 housing units. You can't do them all starting at the same time. You have to gear up into a programme, procurement or design, procurement and all the rest of it, and the finance. And that pace has to build up over time. And so measuring that, seeing how realistic it is in relation to the 2030 target would be a very useful thing for you to continue.
Absolutely. And can I ask Councillor Pascal, you were saying how the council's property portfolio across housing and offices accounts for more than 90% of our
council's
carbon footprint. Two questions on that. If you know, what's the balance between housing and offices?
Housing is something like 60%.
60%.
57%.
Okay, so the offices is still a large element of it. And then what's the balance between just heating and other elements like electricity?
It depends entirely on the project.
On the whole, across.
I mean, some places that have a lot of lighting, for instance, if they haven't got LEDs, they'll have a very high electricity cost.
So that leads me on to the next question. What are we doing on our offices where we don't have, arguably we can act quickly?
Can I suggest that maybe if you ask the question about schools, you can get a fuller answer, because that money has just been approved.
All right, well, on schools and our offices, in terms of reducing the footprint.
I think we have to be conscious of the offices as well, though. I just saw our council energy bill has gone from 3 million to 6.7 million just on the energy cost of the council's own operation. So if you think of spending to save, this is one of the really good examples where we can demonstrate a saving on it. But yeah, if you
turn the lights on.
Yeah, these aren't
they're not that. So we've got a retrofit accelerator program, which is focusing on some of the operational buildings, around 32 schools as well. So we're focusing this year on kind of 5 priority schools. That's looking at kind of low carbon heat source, heating, new windows, solar panels, various insulation as well. So we're focusing on that. So we're looking at doing 5 to 8 schools a year now, where we're really trying to make them as kind of fuel efficient as possible as well. The same with the operational buildings. So we're looking at Chelsea Old Town Hall and the leisure centre there, this building, and also Holland Park as well. So and there's work going on at Pembroke Road as well. So we've got a kind of a programme, and we're working with corporate property.
And the interventions in that around insulation and moving to LEDs.
Yeah, there's all those. So there's LEDs, there's kind of business management systems as well, making sure that we've got better heating. So old Chelsea Town Hall is new heating, so air source heat pumps as well. We've got the sports centre down there as well, so there's really quite high usage as well. So again, we're working with the North Kensington Leisure Centre as well on the heat network. So from 2024, that should all be connected up to the heat network, which will include Lake West, and that will be carbon neutral heating. So that should be 5% of our council emissions gone straight away. So we're going back to the pace question. There's been a lot of kind of work around developing strategies and policies. Now we've got those in place, we are actually kind of getting out there and doing the implementing, which is really key. So there's £14 million that have been invested by the council as capital funding. Tomorrow it's the deadline for the decarbonisation fund, which we're bidding for another 2 million as well. So there's a lot of kind of extra funding that we're
Is that an external fund?
Yeah, that's
the approach. I mean, Council Glasgow makes a point of over 100 million to fund this programme. That would cripple the HRA to fund that if that was their entire remit. They are actually also, of course, spending money on upgrading the homes themselves. So what we have to do is through officers is find the money that's out there and use it as efficiently as possible. And schools are a great place to start because it saves the school money once the investment's been made.
Yeah, and it's probably it's unfair on the residents to put it on the HRA because they get some of the benefit, but the benefit.
An example on schools. I'm chairman governors of one primary school and the governor on another one. And the technology required in one school to improve its carbon footprint is completely different from the other one. One's purely to do with installation of windows, the other's more to do with control systems, management.
So there's no one size fits
There's
all.
none.
So we have a net zero dashboard of some sort to track our progress on this. I don't want you to create something just.
No, we do. So we've got a new sustainability board tomorrow, which we're going over that. So we can definitely share that with you. It needs a little bit of tweaking, but we can definitely.
Once that's up and running, that'll be.
My favourite dashboard is the yearly figures the government puts out, which show we've cut emissions faster than any other authority over the last 5 years. So I'll be keeping a keen eye on this year's data update.
That is excellent news. Councillor Williams.
In your initial response to Pascal, I think you mentioned that RVKC council's emissions are only 1% of RVKC as an area's emissions. Is there anything that we can be doing on this list to sort of partnering either with the private sector, with residents to try and, at the same time as we're bringing down our ones, and that's obviously a tiny fraction, and actually, it's a drop in the ocean really. What would you be looking to see, or would you be recommending to the leadership?
First thing I'd say is that this is definitely, I think, a topic that you should look at as to whether you want to do this either this year or next year in ESC. Because the 2040 ambition for the borough as a whole is a whole different shape or problem. And what we had some briefings on it as ESC, we didn't include it in our report. What we were aware of was the fact that Terry's and other Terry's team as a core were working with other parts of the council and many partners outside. And there are partners such as the big estates, the housing associations, the NHS, Albertopolis, the Exhibition Road group, and a whole number of other organisations. And some of them, in some ways, are ahead of us in terms of their ambition and what they're doing. So it's a partnership exercise. And Terry and Jim, no doubt, would like to fill in more detail there.
No, I agree. We're not operating in isolation on this. A large number of organisations made similar commitments. It goes back to my earlier priorities of facilitation. Where they say, Cadogan, for instance, have raised the issue of windows themselves as they have solar in conservation areas. So we facilitated it by adjusting our policies, and that's what we have to continue to do, because we appreciate that houses cannot be kept in the form they were created. I mean, we had chimneys in homes, many of us still do, but we don't heat our homes with chimneys anymore. So we have to help the houses modernise as time goes on.
There are also some complex dimensions to this that are not strictly energy technical. For instance, after COVID, people working from home 2 days a week, maybe. The whole tourism pattern has maybe changed, maybe not. We'll just have to see in a couple of years as to what things come back to. So ways of working, ways of eating, ways of living, ways of communicating. all those things will be social, technological, and economic change within the borough, but not just in the borough, nationally, internationally.
Yeah.
They will have an effect on the way things happen in the borough. And we'll have to respond to our part that we can enable that to happen in a neutral way.
One of the big focuses for the next few years will be that engagement piece as well, so working with the local communities, so whether it's residents, whether it's businesses, whether it's different organisations, in supporting them to achieve or help achieve the 2040 targets. So we're really kind of upping the ante around that as well. But we need to be in a certain position before we started that engagement, so we kind of need to lead by example in that.
And what
There's another enabler the borough's done over the last couple of years is that you've probably been, whether you're in an electric car, an ordinary car, or a bicycle walking, you've had your street blocked by being ripped up for fibre optics. It's been a massive increase. And South Korea and Hull had 1 gigabit to every arrangement 50 years, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So Hull, because it was the only authority in UK, was not subject to the nationalised BT. And it did its own thing, and it went way ahead in terms of tech.
Interesting.
So,
yeah. The follow-up question that I was going to ask. I did have another question, which was when we're looking at value for money of reducing, where best to spend what money is available to reduce our carbon footprint. We also factoring in air quality. So if you, a ton of CO2 here and a ton of CO2 equivalent there, if one's slightly more expensive but also reduces nitrous oxide, particulate matter, things from boilers and stuff, whereas another one's just reducing electricity consumption.
Yes, I'm very keen on that. When I was doing adult social care and public health, we allocated public health funding directly to air quality as well. So yes, you're right. You have to make a balance where you spend your next pound. If we can have those co-benefits of air quality being improved as well as emissions being reduced. So schools, again, the reason we chose them is that there's that benefit to young children in the air quality around them. So green screens may do very little for the building's emission, if any, but what they will do at least is stop pollutants getting into the playground, etc. So we can fund some things through public health, we can fund others through council capital borrowing, and then external funding as well.
Yeah.
That's why we've got the green plan as well, which kind of has those 5 priorities. So they do support each other rather than just looking at kind of carbon reduction as a single kind of focus.
Okay.
Also, the making of the green plan was done by a core group, which involves all the departments across the whole council. So housing, adult social care, employment insurance services, and environment communities all entered into. That's why in our report we made sure that we involved legal and procurement and so on, and risk register as well as some of the implementing departments like school housing.
Councillor Judy.
Yes, because you mentioned about equality, and just I remembered something about the parking being flat rate, £22 a year.
Only for electric cars. Other cars pay more.
I was wondering, it does not really, according to your sort of equality, if you have parking and it's so cheap, more people will be going and taking the cars, right? So is it not better just to see our map of Royal Borough and see which places are really badly polluted and introduce a higher rate for parking to literally, I'm not just saying because some cars are different electric, but really encourage people to use the cars and just walk, use the bicycle. So more than as the map of the highest level of pollution and how much you charge for parking, where is the parking space. Like for instance, what I have now in my mind is Big Sainsbury in Dalgano. You have a sports center for young people, but parking, it's very outside by Sainsbury. So imagine, I don't say that you have to close because it's a shopping, but imagine if this parking is somewhere else near there, it's adding up. And if, let's say, this kind of spark is somewhere else at churches or somewhere else near the parks, this carriage bring bigger amount of money to pay. So just walk, if the parking is by Holland Park or somewhere else, you know what I mean? So 2 maps, 1 map. which
Yeah.
is bigger but most
This is
polluted area, where is the parking space? Is it contributed toward that pollution?
Yeah.
With me?
no, I am. But
And
there's
then
a
introduce a higher parking rate.
miscommunication
to-
between pay by phone and residents. So I wouldn't want to
Just
charge
encourage
residents more because they happen to live in a more polluted part of the borough. I think that would be unfair. What we do on pay by phone, which is across the borough for people visiting, is we give a discount for electric cars and we charge a premium for diesel. So we already have that mechanism on our pricing. I mean, Hammersmith and Fulham charge zero, Wandsworth charge zero for electric vehicles. So yes, £22 is a very small number and likely will go up, but we can't just turn that into £100 because it would mean all the other vehicles also have to pay an extra £100 on their permit. And given the cost of living at the moment, to make such a big change would be very costly to people. So what we're trying to do is incentivise them by having these discounts in effect, but not penalise those that can't afford to make the change. There are some people that pay £400 for their parking permit, for instance, because they have a very large engine. But just because they happen to live in a polluted area shouldn't mean they have to pay more.
One thing to follow up on that is that I've noticed the ratio of EV parking charge to non-EV for a residence permit is much greater than for pay by phone. Pay by phone you still do get a discount, but the discount proportionally isn't as great. And I know it's with pay by phone there's not the multiple bands, but maybe that's something we could look to make that ratio a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, initially we created that a number of years ago and we wanted to see where it was going. It's still only on about, I think it's 6 or 7% of visitors coming in electric cars. We could further discount it, but of course then there's that balancing act of funding council services.
Well, yeah, you can increase the other way.
You can increase diesel more, but then again, it's inflation with what it is, adding an additional surcharge.
We want to, I mean, again, these things might take a while to filter through, but we just want to incentivise tradesmen, for example, again, go back to, they're making a decision tomorrow on what type of van to buy for their new van. We just want to make sure.
I mean, if you put it in tradesman terms, and they come to the borough every day, you're looking at about £300-400 a month of saving by going to an electric from a diesel, which if you look at a lease on an electric van, basically pays for it.
Yeah.
So that incentive is quite strong. Maybe we could do more in letting people know that it is out there.
Yeah.
But I think already the differential is quite great.
It's quite meaningful, yeah. And we just need other boroughs to follow our
I think
lead.
also we need to recognise that not everybody is either a car driver or a walker or a bus user.
Yeah.
Different purposes and at different times and different circumstances. The same person can use different forms of transport. And it's really a question of incentivising to use the least polluting one. And in fact, the least polluting one, funny enough, is bicycling over walking. Walking, you produce more carbon dioxide as a human being than you do by cycling. So you shouldn't be allowed to walk. You shouldn't penalise people from walking.
Do that.
But I mean, and on a personal level, I brought my wife, who's on the crutches at the moment, up here to the town hall from the other end of the high street in a car today, and took her back. When I came up here tonight, I walked. Those are the sort of choices that we should make. Yeah, should have cycled.
On vehicle, and this crosses net zero and air quality, on the vehicle element of it, obviously a lot of the problem is vehicles passing through the borough. Do we have, what levers do we have as a council on that, or even any subsection of that, like tour buses or something like that? Could we ban tour coaches from our roads?
So TfL are a bit more involved in these things than one would ordinarily like, unfortunately. So, I mean, the biggest control we have is the parking, where we've already made that point. And we are obviously lobbying hard for buses to go electric. Sadiq had made a commitment to be net zero by 2030, which I remember at the time I worked out that he had to change something like 80 buses a week. And as of a few weeks ago, he had 89 in total. So I don't think we're quite getting there on that one. But the technology is changing. So I think in the next few years, the next round of vehicles, the next round of lorries, the next round of goods vehicles will be electric. And you've got companies like National Express promising to go electric on their buses. You'll see the rollout of hydrogen on lorries and things like that. I think it's not necessarily in our control, but we can help facilitate by putting the plugs in, putting the depots in, changing our bin lorries at Pembroke Road for electric, making those changes so that when society and technology catches up, we're sort of already there. But the direct levers are things like supporting ULEZ that exists, whether it needs to be expanded, different conversation. But now that we're in the zone, there is a clear benefit on nitrogen dioxide, whether it's at a penalty to people having to change their cars, and the cost to those people is one for the mayor to weigh heavy on his shoulders. But
I think on the rubbish vehicles you mentioned that we should pay credits to Terry's team for renegotiating the contract, including a way of making sure that the stock of lorries that we use through that contract had reached a point of financial maturity at the point at which we would want to buy electric ones because they become technically really mature. So aligning those things well in advance was a very skillful piece of work that was done when I had James Portfolio.
I have a very small question. Do you have like a scheme introducing children walk to school? Walk to your park, just encourage more people to walk in.
Yeah, we were one of my predecessors was one of the first boroughs to implement school streets, and there are sort of active travel arrangements with schools. To be honest, it's getting difficult to find more schools that are willing to organise these things because there is the issue of putting up barriers, taking them away. I went to a school street the other day, and I confess, to be honest, the cars were just dropping the kids off further away rather than coming on scooters or on foot or whatever. So I think there's a sort of a lifestyle change that will take a bit of time, but we can certainly help facilitate it by road closures and like.
We're nudging a process that's been going on for a long time. Terry, I think you can supply some figures, but the number of parking permits in the borough came down steadily for many, many years.
Yeah.
So this has been a trend, and it's really a question of nudging and increasing that trend. But there are circumstances where cars are absolutely vital.
On that note, I think we might call a end to this evening's proceedings. That last item I think was very interesting, and we'll be bringing that to. Oh, sorry, we've got one more agenda. So we note it, and we're going to bring it to full council. Thank you, Mr. Oliver. Item 9, Select Committee Work Programme Report. The only thing I was going to ask very quickly, Councillor Durian, do you think you'd be ready to bring, at the moment, the flood report is scheduled to come to the next committee. Do you want to keep it at next committee?
What is the date of the next committee?
Sometime in November. 23rd of November. You don't have to give me an answer.
We'll see. I can't give a guarantee.
Okay. Obviously, we need a bit of notice, so.
We have 2 more meetings scheduled.
Okay. So if you let me know by the end of the month whether you can do it for 23rd of November.
Oh, we can definitely let you know by then.
Okay, fantastic. So that's noted. Item 10, any other business? No. We therefore conclude this evening's business. Next meeting of the Environment Select Committee is scheduled to be held on the 23rd of November. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.